We start singing about TRI. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. That's what we gotta do. Oh, now you better watch it. That is something that's, yeah, that sounds like something that's like, I can do some rap on the TRI. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
We get $500 off our admission for next year. We do karaoke, right?
Yes. I can do whatever I want, but here's the thing, you have to bring 2 more people. Okay? 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 Or sign up, I'll take it off right now. You sign up for a assessment before July 1st. No, I will not say July 1st. June, no, not June 1st. May 15th. May 15th. I just need a week. I just need a week, okay? Okay. Lauren's going, I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her. June 1st? Are you kidding me? You idiot? No. Idiot was probably nice, but you know. Launch back into TRI because it is so wonderful and you won't fall asleep or anything because we'll make sure that, you know, you get really excited about it. He's already taken drugs, you know, so good. You know, sharing would have been nice, Ron, you know. Yeah, it's like, I mean, come on, come on. Cool, cool. That's not the fun ones. Well, that's what he's telling us. Recreational Claritin. Okay. It is Mardi Gras. Okay. The 4 certification statement. Hi, Dee. You can sit in and listen to TRI. It's more fun than wastewater. I said you can listen to TRI. It's more fun than wastewater. Oh, okay. Get out of here. Get out of here. Love you. This is more fun? Oh, I thought you were saying that was more fun. Ah, and you get beads. Now, just tell your wife, it's like I got beads, but I didn't get them the legitimate Mardi Gras way. So, you know. Yet. Well, that's true. Well, let's put it this way. Nah. There's a whole... You have to then sign up for a TRI assessment in like a week. I want a purchase order. I want a whole lot of stuff, baby. Okay. This is that professional stuff they don't tell you about, right? You know, bad influence. It's all negotiating. You know what? Everything's for sale, right? God, I love this group. This is really good. So much more fun. So much more fun. It's that one thing that you guys think of with your brain that's the reason why we just, yeah, it's great. It's great. Do you, okay, Guy, actually got to get back on track. Okay. Do you both have Title V permits at your sites?
Yes.
Okay. Yay. So what do you think the difference is between a Title V designated felon certification and the TRI designated felon certification?
Title V, you have to actually know what's going on.
You have to actually know what's going on.
Well, myself, people.
Yeah, right. And this is really small lettering, so if you really got really great, you know, it's almost like, why aren't you a fighter pilot instead of reading this stuff? But basically the fact is that the TRI standard, the EPCRA standard for signing the Form R, is that you have reasonable inquiry, that you do understand that, you know, to the best of your belief and your knowledge that this is accurate. The fact is that it is a whole lot less stringent than the Clean Air Act for Title V because, yeah, it's Title V is, you know, pretty much slit your wrist, you know, put the blood on there and move on. But when you're looking, especially on TRI, there's so many components going into the TRI report, and so it is going to be a function of your emission inventory questionnaire. It's going to be a function of your, you know, the waste that you're sending off, and it's based on reasonable knowledge of processes. It is not mandatory that you have, you know, a CEMS to prove that your air emissions are correct, that that's what's going on your TRI. So it is one of those things that a Title V certification is a whole lot more stringent. Now, in this particular case, if you had a minor source air permit, this is more stringent than that in most cases. So, when we're talking about who needs to report, I mean, this is something to pretty much gloss over. Depending on the type of facility, when you're looking at industrial facilities such as petroleum refineries, and you're looking at chemical facilities, foundries, metal fabrication, automotive plants, aircraft, any, fertilizer plants. It's going to be the sources that are actually using a fair amount of chemical, and there actually have to be the specific chemicals that are listed on the TRI list. But, the key question always comes down to, what are you bringing in? And again, you have a lot of tier 2 chemicals that are not on the TRI list. So, a lot of people think, oh, well, I just take what's on my tier 2 and then I put it on. It's like, no. The tier 2 list is any hazardous substance in excess of 10,000 pounds or the 500 pounds for an EHS. When you look at TRI, you're looking really more at like the EHS list. You're looking at the toxic chemicals that there's a lot more of a problem. If there is it's more of a super hazard from a toxic standpoint, more like a lot of the items that are on your HAP list. That is where we get into the TRI. This is the type of stuff that in excess quantities, you're killing a lot of people. You're causing a significant amount of environmental damage. You also have chemical categories, groups like when we're talking about glycol ethers, where you're talking about, other, the packs, where you may have 20, 30, 40 different chemicals. Glycol ethers are thousands of chemicals. To try to think and memorize those isn't going to happen. And when you do threshold determinations, it's for each chemical. So you can have mixtures that have multiple TRI chemicals in them, or chemical categories, 3, 4, 5 different components of that mixture, and as long as you're above de minimis for them or otherwise taking them out for some reason you wouldn't have to consider that mixture, you're going to be doing threshold determinations for each chemical or chemical category. So that's something to keep in mind is, weld rod, a lot of all your different components and mixtures could have multiple TRI chemicals contained in them. And good note at the bottom, you normally, once you have your system set up, just like we were talking about this morning at tier 2, if you're doing the same thing at your facility, if you're making gasoline, if you're a refinery, if you're a chemical processor, unless you change suppliers, major suppliers, or you decide to make new products, you're typically going to report the same TRI chemicals every year. Another really good thing, and we do start telling people more and more, go in, you can do searches on TRI Explorer and you can look and find out, okay, what are my competitors doing? And EPA does that, just so you know. EPA does the same thing. If they looked at refineries or particular type of, foundry, let's say it was a zinc foundry, they want to see what they're reporting. You're usually within a chemical or 2 of each other. If there's 6 or 7 missing chemicals that you're not reporting and you're doing pretty much the same thing as a sister facility, call me and say, here, come and have some fun, okay? Because I actually had a facility that in Texas, they submitted TRI. And then I was talking to the corporate guy and he goes, yeah, we got a facility in Louisiana. And I go, how come you don't submit a TRI for Louisiana? He goes, I don't know. I said, not the answer I was looking for. So we came in and did an assessment, and lo and behold, they were subject and they should have been reporting for the last 3 years. Again, things that they were like, why wouldn't somebody in corporate figure this out? Duh. You're making the same types of stuff. If you're reporting for one facility, if you're reasonably assured that you're using the same amounts or about same capacity, you should be reporting for all the other facilities. And it's a good way to check against to make sure that something I'm missing. Why am I missing? Double check it, good QA, QC.
Find something like that, do you go back and report for the whole 5, like past?
We will talk about that. However, I'm going to give this to you.
I can wait.
No, we'll talk. If you find out that you have a chemical you should have been reporting and have not been, that's when you do that lovely voluntary disclosure. And then probably file for the last 5 years if you've triggered the last 5. The regulation is 3 years for that they require you in a rule that you maintain records for 3 years, but if you've botched it for 3, you submit for 5, because the statute of limitations that they can nail you is 5. So if you have missing chemicals, you file for the 5 prior years if you have to, at the very minimum 3. But that's a voluntary disclosure item. If you just found an error and you should have reported a little bit more, or something's messed up, then you can do a revision.
The other part of that is if you get better data, there are instances where you wouldn't be held accountable for having missed it.
Correct.
If it's based on a new piece of information that you didn't have before, that wasn't readily available then.
You're similar required to like have the same source.
Exactly.
Right.
So
Exactly.
if you had that, now that's the best available data, you would be required to go back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So moving forward, you would then be required to have it, but anyway, so you at least have that to keep in mind. I was just going to say one other item in terms of things that may change from year to year would be chiller units, like recharging with ammonia. You may only do that in excess of a threshold once every 10 years or so. So that's, something that can pop on and off. And same thing with catalysts. Okay, so do I need to report? This is just going to be a recap of everything that we had kind of started talking about before lunch. Step 1, am I a covered NAICS code? Step 2, do I have more than 10 employees or 20,000 man hours? And step 3, do I manufacture, process, or otherwise use a TRI listed chemical component in excess of the listed thresholds? And if the answer to all 3 of those is yes, then you need to be submitting, you need to submit either a Form A or a Form R. So just to give you some background on the various chemicals, have you guys all seen the TRI chemical list? Are you familiar? If not, you can get a copy on EPA's website. And it's basically just a long list of more than 650 individual chemicals and chemical categories. And there's 4 parts. It'll give you the individual chemical names by alphabet, by CAS number, and then also a description of our chemicals that are going to come with qualifiers. So what we have written up there is sulfuric acid. So sulfuric acid would come with the qualifier that it's only for the mist or aerosol form, not the physical liquid. Same with IPA. And then other chemical categories, which would be the overarching category of glycol ethers and things like that. So it wouldn't be specific CAS numbers so much as a chemical category. And this list can and does change every year. So that's one of the first things I like to do when I start out with my TRI for the year is download what will now be the 2014 EPA's list of instructions and the 2014 list of chemicals. And as Ms. said, we are adding a chemical this year, O-nitrotoluene. But I don't think, it's pretty specific. I don't think it would impact, I'd be surprised if it impacted you guys.
Do you know if they update that?
Oh, yeah.
Just about to talk about it.
Okay. So here is EPA's list of lists. And this got published a while ago. So this one, well, I guess they would have just come out with another one this year.
This one is 2012, unless they published a new one for 2013.
I would think they'd publish a new one for O-nitro.
Yeah.
Toluene.
I would think they do, but it didn't usually, because they published, it's 2012.
Would have been
They
H2S.
have a brand new one for 2014, the O-nitrotoluene, and then they have a brand new one that's got published in 2014 that you need to start tracking for 2015 that is due
Yeah.
that is due in 2016.
And so kind of like we had talked about in this morning session, list of lists is a good go-to because that's going to give us what's a 302 chemical, what's 302 extremely hazardous substance, what's a TRI chemical, and what's our RMP chemicals.
How do we get that super consolidated list?
Did we give it? Is it on your flash drive? It's
Did you guys get a flash drive? All of that stuff's on the flash drive. We have a bunch of reference documents on there and today's slideshow and dancing baby.
That's how we make sure that you look through it all. If you get to the dancing baby, you've gone far enough. Okay, so now just to delve a little bit deeper, Obviously, one's listed by name and cast number is pretty straightforward when we're looking at the MSDS and that kind of thing. So now we're going to talk about the chemicals that come with qualifiers. So this is a good thing to keep in the back of your mind as you're doing your evaluation. And it's a little bit hard to read, but we've got aluminum, which has the qualifier that it's only reportable in the fume or dust form. Aluminum oxide, which is going to be fibrous. Asbestos, friable. IPA, only when manufacturers created it using the strong acid process. Phosphorus, only if it's yellow or white. Saccharin, manufacturer only. Hydrochloric acid, this only incorporates aerosols or emissions formed. And sulfuric acid, same thing, only are acid aerosols. And vanadium, except when contained in an alloy. And all right, so here's our chemical categories. So this is what we were talking about, where it'll be a grouping. So some ones that we have listed would be cyanide compounds, diisocyanates, and those are actually listed by cast number. So when you see a diisocyanate on your MSDS, just run that by your list of the 20 listed diisocyanates within the diisocyanate category. Glycol ethers, our nitrate compounds, and PBBs. All right, so TRI threshold activities exclusions. So essentially this is just a list we put together of items that in and of itself are not a TRI threshold activity. So the most common misconception and what we have listed first would be storage. So that's what we're using for our tier 2. But as we discussed, that's not going to play into how we do our TRI threshold calculations. So that may be a good QA/QC double check to compare the lists. But what we're physically using for thresholds is going to be what we're processing, manufacturing, and using, not what we're storing. Relabeling without repackaging, direct reuse on-site recycling, transfers sent off-site for further waste management, and remediation of on-site contamination. And if an exemption applies, then the amount of the TRI chemical subject to that exemption does not have to be included. So that's going to count for our thresholds, our release, and our supplier notification. And a lot of times it's difficult to separate that out from the release information. So I've seen people go ahead and even if it is exempt, just use their EI number or the data that they do have. But in certain cases, it can be very beneficial, to go that extra step and exempt it out. And the other important part is kind of as we had talked about, knowing the exemptions, but then also applying them in the correct circumstances. So we're going to get into more specifics on, what's intended by that exemption. All right, so here's our list of exemptions: de minimis, article, laboratory, NEICS code, and otherwise use exemptions like motor vehicle, routine janitorial, structural components, personal use, and intake water and air. So you'll see that this may look kind of similar to Tier 2, but it's listed in a separate part of the regulation and is a separate list. So de minimis exemption only applies to non-PBT chemicals. So the PBTs are going to be listed out in your TRI instruction manual, and that's kind of what we had talked about with the lead, mercury, those guys that are found in typically really small concentrations. So wherever present in mixtures, wherever coincidentally manufactured, such as you're going to find a lot of those as impurities during combustion, so like the lead oxide and all those little PBTs that you're manufacturing during combustion, as well as anything coincidentally manufactured during combustion that's not a PBT. So sorry, that was a confusing way to say that, but no de minimis exemption when you're coincidentally manufacturing, is what I was trying to say. And then during import of mixtures, so a good example of this would be if a refinery is importing Canadian crude via pipeline, that crude now has to be incorporated. And de minimis exemption does not apply to manufactured chemicals, waste received from off-site, and PBT chemicals, as we had just talked about. All right, so PBT chemicals and the de minimis exemption. So our PBTs are not going to be eligible for de minimis, which means that anytime we see them or manufacture them or process them or otherwise use them, we're going to have to incorporate them. Even though they may not be listed on the SDS, that doesn't mean that they're not there. So that's where our trade-specific guidance and that sort of thing would come into play to helping us know if I'm an asphalt manufacturer, you know, my SDS for my asphalt may not list all these little PBTs that I have in there and the packs, but from industry guidance, I know that they're there, and I need to be doing calculations and incorporating those. And the article exemption. So to qualify for the article exemption, all 3 of these criteria must apply, and I feel like that's where we see the most mistakes made is probably with this specific exemption, and people applying it where maybe not all 3 apply. So the 3 criteria would be that it's formed into a specific shape or design during manufacture, its end-use functions are dependent on that shape or design, and it does not release a TRI chemical under normal processing or use conditions. So do we have another slide on it? Okay, yeah. So to delve into that a little deeper, releases from an article must be in a quantity of less than 0.5 pounds. So for instance, you could have a, let's say, if you did a little bit of maintenance-related cutting of metal rods, and the amount, so that's an article. It's a solid, it's in end-use form, and we start cutting that, and the amount of releases that we're generating from cutting that are less than half a pound, then we get to maintain that article exemption as long as we're just cutting it. So once we start changing its shape, then the exemption's broken. I don't know if Miss wants to explain that a little better.
Well, we've had problems with this, and when I say we, is metal fabrication industry, you know, when you're making different widgets, you're making metal, you know, you're taking metal rod stock, metal bar stock, and you're making something out of it. What we had actually walked into is there was a facility that had taken, you know, 20-foot metal bar stock, and they were cutting it into small pieces. Well, then they would lathe it until they became this little tiny machine part that was going into an automobile. And they claimed article exemption for everything. And I was like, really? You know, and what they thought is, well, you have an article to begin with, and you end up with an article, so it must stay an article. No. If you bring in that rod and you cut it where you don't have any fume, grindings, grazing, anything that is done to that, where you alter that rod and you just cut it in pieces, then all the rod that you process during that year, if it adds up to half a pound of the grindings, and you calculate that out, assuming that the grindings are the same, you know, concentration of chemicals in that mixture, and you haven't triggered something, okay, great, we'll call that article. But if you are taking a bar stock and you're cutting it, and then you're lathing it, you've got grindings, you've got everything else. I don't care if you were taking all of that grindings and shipping it off to a broker. You have changed the actual form of that bar stock. It is no longer an article. You are generating shavings. Once you start cutting, grazing, grinding, sanding, anything that you start generating a smaller, tiny piece that you cannot really recognize what it came from, you have totally thrown out the article exemption. And it's one of those things that, you know, when it talks about that, you know, it must be recycled or directly reused. Remember when I talked about the aluminum facility that was getting, you know, they were getting coil. They were flattening it out from being, let's say, 3 millimeters thick, and they were pressing it to aluminum foil, and then they'd shear off the end. Well, what was sheared off the end was going for direct reuse, because they were going to take it right back to the metal casting plant and remelt it. That's direct reuse. However, the problem is they didn't have an article because they changed the form. You have changed the material thickness of that metal. You went from 3 millimeters thick or a ½ inch thick, and you went down to, paper thin. You have changed the dimensions and you have processed that material. There is no article exemption. Now, your report, this is what the stupidity of it, and it's just the way the rule is, but they literally triggered reporting, but they had no releases, because what was sheared off at the end was recognizable as the metal. It just was thinner, but they picked it up, they were able to bale it and send it back out. They didn't have any grindings. It still looked like that piece of metal. So the fact of the matter is, by sending it for direct reuse, they had 0 waste that was coming out of there. They still had to report. So one of the things you have to look at is when you ordain, when you keep an article status, when you don't. And that's the whole thing. It's got to maintain its initial thickness or diameter. If you take wire and cut it into 20 pieces, but it's still wire and that's what you're sending off to another facility, you maintain article status, no problem. But I had a client that they did repairs. They built heat exchangers and they repaired existing heat exchangers. And so what they were doing is when they build new ones, they keep track of that. They only build like 3 or 4 a year. So we're not subject to TRI because we've got all the information about our materials. Okay? What about all the ones that you repaired? And what they said with the repairing is they would pull in an old heat exchanger, pull out the tubes, they'd have to regrind, rebraze, repolish, do everything else. And I said, when you start doing that work, now you have to consider the weight of the entire heat exchanger. If they just pulled out tubes, shoved more tubes back in there that they had bought and had just cut, you've kept your article status. So they literally had to start keeping track of which units where they were doing actual processing work where they were getting into article status. It is a very misused exemption, but there is a lot of Q&A guidance in EPA's, 1998 Q&A that it's actually very succinct and very straightforward. And once you start generating grindings, cuttings, shavings, even if you're sending that off for recycle, I have never been to a foundry or to a casting plant or anybody who does fabrication. There is no way in hell that they recycle 100% of their shavings. You see the carts that it goes into, and you see the oils dripping out, you see the stuff that's on there, and typically what I'll do is say, okay, give me the weight of whatever you have, and they have a general idea, and then we'll basically say 2% of that total weight is probably in grindings or in shavings that don't get picked up and end up going, after a point in time, swept up and thrown into the trash. So that's where you show the releases being transferred off-site to your trash. Then we have the amount that goes to a broker and who else that goes in there. But it is aggregate how much releases you have generated from that article once you start processing.
So it's like construction, like just put together tankers and like that, and bring on those panels, or bring on the whole, and weld them together. It's the.
If you were building equipment on site, that metal used to be assessed for TRI purposes because it is being constructed on site and it's process related. So if you were building process equipment, or you're doing that, or you decide one year that you're going to have all of your tanks painted on the outside or inside, you're going to be sandblasted, and it's all going to be done on site, and you have that contracted out, all of that material needs to be included in your TRI evaluation for that year.
All the steel.
Because it is not processed. It is process related. It is another wise use. And it is process related where you are counting that because it is not what is sellable product, because you are now messing with process related equipment. So when you add that, we talk about this all the time. You start asphalting, re-asphalting roads that go to all of your, connecting all of your tanks and plants and process equipment. The asphalt needs to be considered in there.
All right. So laboratory exemption, this is going to be a little more straightforward. And basically, any TRI chemicals that are used under a laboratory, under control of a qualified laboratory technician, can be exempted out. So that's going to include items used for quality assurance, quality control, research and development, sampling and analysis, as long as it's within your lab. One item to keep in mind here would be EPA goes into a little more detail on how to handle pilot plants and like pilot scale operations. And there's a lot of definitions floating around for pilot plant, so you'd want to look at it specific to your facility. But that's something to keep in mind, is that pilot plant operations are not always exempt.
Is that with PBT chemicals as well?
Mm-hmm.
Also good with their laboratory technician.
Yep. Yeah, so like your little vials of benzene and those types of things. And so TRI chemicals used in the laboratory activities that are not exempt, so your pilot scale, pilot plants, activities not conducted in the lab, support services, so process-related type services, and specialty chemical production that would then go into your process.
If you are doing a clean out of your lab where you're taking TRI cleaning chemicals to clean out your lab, that is not a lab activity. That should be counted.
All right, so the motor vehicle maintenance exemption. So we had touched on this a little bit earlier, but TRI chemicals used to maintain your vehicles on site are eligible for exemption. So this would be like your antifreeze or that kind of thing, used to maintain your motor vehicles like your cars, your trucks, spacecrafts,
You have a craft, you know.
in case you have those. So this is going to include repairs, washing, fueling, and adding other fluids. So like the fuel just used, providing it to the truck. However, the exemption does not apply to the manufacture of TRI chemicals during combustion.
The
So,
whole coincidental manufacturer thing, all the stuff used to maintain the vehicles is exempt. You know, even your batteries. A lot of people think the batteries are subject to TRI. I know they're not. The only time that a lead acid battery is subject to TRI is if you're a truck or an automotive manufacturer where you are incorporating that battery into a vehicle. You have now processed that battery, processed the battery because of the sulfuric acid, even though it's not a aerosol, but because you've incorporated that or you've added fuel. If you add fuel, we have to put in 5 to 6 gallons of fuel in every car that goes off the assembly line. All the fluids that were put in there, like the windshield washer fluid and the antifreeze, the gasolines, anything that was put in as fluid filled before that vehicle rolls off the assembly line, all has to be counted to TRI because you are processing it and it's being incorporated into the soluble product. But in this case, if you have vehicles around you, all of that stuff is exempt under the motor vehicle maintenance exemption. But remember, when you can't manufacture TRI chemicals, it's not subject to de minimis, it's not subject to this either. So you may have, whatever gallons of fuel will go into your forklifts or your trucks or anything else on site, fine. But you have to do the calculation for combustion of that fuel.
and what helps me kind of think about it is the fuel that's going in to the trucks and fueling and all those gallons is otherwise use. And so that's exempt, but the manufacturer is what's not exempt. So the physical combustion calculations. Janitorial grounds maintenance exemption. This is kind of exactly what it sounds like. So TRI chemicals contained in products for non-process related janitorial, facility grounds maintenance, that kind of thing, are exempt. So we don't have to worry about our janitorial cleaners and our pesticides used for lawn care and that kind of thing.
But it does still apply to, like, the gasoline you put in your lawnmowers.
I'd consider that.
But
I'd consider that
I would consider that
grounds maintenance exemption.
Yeah, I would say for lawnmowers or, that type of stuff, I would probably put that into,
So there's not the same type of caveat here. It's just if it's related to grounds maintenance or janitorial and it's non-process, you get to exempt it.
since it's not process related and a forklift or a truck or a crane is process related, that is why you consider the manufacturer from combustion. Where the lawnmower, unless you're making lawnmowers or else, that's part of your actual business. Groundskeeping, taking care of your janitorial grounds, you would have the maintenance exemption applied to that.
Is that applying to gas? So that was a much bigger problem. Because I feel like we included it just as we weren't sure.
Right. No, that would fall under the janitorial grounds maintenance exemption.
Okay, so, oh, yeah.
So if as part of the janitorial ground maintenance, you were putting on the ice melt stuff, what is that, how does that relate? Because you said earlier that the snow ice melt stuff we need to count
For tier two.
for tier 2 storage.
Right.
So that's a great question. So the difference being is that we have a different list of exemptions for the two. So we get to have facility and grounds maintenance exemptions here that we don't have for tier 2.
But tier two, there has substance, so they just consider that you're storing it, even though it is for your facility maintenance, it still has a substance that could have exposure issues to the employees. So for tier two, it's covered. But here, the difference for TRI is that it's really related to process chemicals and throughput through your facility, and that they're not really concerned about the janitorial side or the non-process related activities.
And that's a great question because sometimes ice melt can contain like glycol ethers, which would be a TRI chemical. So if you're just
Correct.
Yeah, so if you're just looking at your purchasing list and your MSDSs, you would think subject, but that would be a great place to use your grounds maintenance exemption. And structural component exemption. So most often I like to use this one if the facility was doing some sort of structural construction. So like adding an entire wing and constructing like the walls and that kind of thing. So TRI chemicals used as structural components are eligible for exemption if they are part of the facility structure and are not process related. So that's going to be our walls, our ceiling, our
Shell.
offices, the shell, and offices aren't considered process related. So this would include potable water pipes and other non-process related pipes and structures.
Lauren, did you get the slide before this one, or did we end up? Yeah, I think we missed this one, and the one key piece is to go through that first bullet, about the activities that aren't exempt.
Okay, so what would not be exempt would be our process-related facility equipment maintenance and cleaning or maintenance activities that are, again, associated with the process. So it would need to be the grounds or true janitorial type items.
If you're cleaning compressors, if you're cleaning fire pumps, if you are cleaning tanks, piping, anything, your RTO, you're pouring a pad for an RTO, anything that is used that is process related, even in maintaining that equipment where you're applying the lubricants or zinc, zinc-based, greases, any of those things, that all needs to be included. Those do not apply for this exemption. Because again, it's just continuing to keep it, is it process related or not? Even if it's, preventative maintenance activities.
And that's going to really carry through to the structural component again. Is it process related? Is it not? Some process related items that would not be eligible for this exemption include refractory brick, boiler tubes, process-related pipes, our grinding, metalworking, structural components integral to the process. Yeah, and refractory brick is a good one that a lot of people don't think about. There's can be a fair number of TRI chemicals in refractory brick.
What is refractory?
Like if you had like an oven,
Kiln,
kiln, like the bricks used to make that.
cement kilns.
And like a lot of facilities have to replace those every year. Like we have a facility who's a glass manufacturer. And if you're curious about a really interesting example, so refractory brick can be, in certain instances, qualify for otherwise use because, you're otherwise using it as a part of, non-process related. And sometimes there's like cobalt or metal compounds in there where you can be manufacturing, when it heats up, coincidentally manufacturing a metal compound. And then for some of our clients, it's also process related because those impurities, like chromium compounds, are purposefully manufactured to be incorporated into like the glass as an impurity. I don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of like a fun one.
I didn't know what TRI chemicals are in refractory brick.
Just like metals. And yeah, I'd say metals. All right, so the otherwise use exemption. So this is going to be, again, non-process related items that would be used for employee personal use. So like our hand sanitizers and inks and office related type things. Our air conditioners used solely for employee comfort. Chlorine used to treat on-site potable water. Phenol used in a facility medical dispensary. And TRI chemicals in the intake water and air. So really just, and things that you could buy over the counter, used for personal use.
Is that only HSE 22 or is it any?
Anything used for comfort cooling of like the office section, so non-process related.
There's multiple HCFCs on the TRI list, multiple ones.
Are the low greenhouse gas ones like the new 410?
No, I don't believe that those are on there, but I think it, I'd have to remember, but I know that 22's on there. I'm trying to think of some of the other, CFC and HCFCs are on there, but the new ones are on there. The non-ODS
Right.
chemicals are the ones that are, ODS chemicals are the ones that are typically on the TRI list. And as they get phased out, that's always beneficial, but,
So yeah, the key part of that just being non-process related. All right. So as we kind of talked about, we've got the 3 activity thresholds: 25,000 pounds for manufacture, 25,000 pounds for process, and 10,000 pounds for otherwise use. So that's our step 1. So what falls under manufacturing? So manufacturing is generating a TRI chemical by intentionally producing chemicals for sale, distribution, or on-site use or processing, like intermediates. Manufacture can also include coincidentally producing these chemicals as byproducts or impurities, so like how we talked about with combustion, or importing a TRI chemical, which is like what we talked about with crude oil pipelines from Canada, things coming into the U.S. from international.
one of the things, and it's really tiny there because we did, put the asterisk in it, and you were talking earlier about byproducts. It's very interesting about coincidentally for some of these, chemicals is what's happening. I mean, an impurity is typically something that is present in the initial component, or, a fuel, and that when it undergoes combustion, in some cases naphthalene. Naphthalene comes in as naphthalene that is in natural gas. But when you combust it, it's still in there. It doesn't change anything. So that's an impurity that travels in, comes in, so it's an otherwise used before you do the combustion, and then when it comes out, it stays as that way. So it's just passing all the way through. Whereas a byproduct is a chemical that you actually, and this is one of the things that they try to look at is the byproduct is actually created by either chemical reaction, or you've derived it where you actually are separating that out from a process, and then you're using that as a sellable product and it goes in. So a lot of times what we try to look at when we're looking at manufacturing is, what are you doing with it? Is it an impurity? Is it actually a byproduct? And where's it going out of the train, so that you can keep track of it in your process? Well, what typically, I mean, that's really great, because what you're talking about, you have a whole lot happening right there. Because you have to do an evaluation of, when is the HCl getting made? Is it, HCl is unrecordable if it's in aerosol or a mist. So at some point in time, when you are forming that HCl, have you basically produced, before it gets to the scrubber, how much have you produced, and have you hit the 25,000 pounds? Because that's a coincidental manufacture. That you actually manufacture it into aerosol format. It may condense, obviously, before it gets to the scrubber. You want to do that calculation for HCl, and then of course we've now applied the scrubber, so that is a treatment on site, and then you're going to have the emission that comes off of that, and you will have to note that in your whole release calculation for that particular, for HCl. But then again, you have to end up isolating that fuel that you're pulling off, and finding out at what point in time have you actually triggered where you have to do the calculation. That would be for HCl, right? And that is one of the things. We've actually had ones where, let's say you have benzene coming in on a crude at, and it's below de minimis. You know, fine. But we've actually had sulfur. Sulfur comes in a lot of cases, depending on whether it's with your sour, will come in at a certain level, and you want to, determine is it de minimis or not. Well, it's de minimis. Well, at another point, once you start cracking it and refining, you get to the point where now you've created H2S. You would have a reaction. Well, that's where you do, somewhere in the middle of your process, you are calculating an H2S, you're doing a calculation, because now you're going to find out, well, now I'm making H2S. You're ultimately going to be separating it out, and you're going to be trying to, pull out the sulfur, and maybe you have an acid that you have got to show at some point, where am I formed H2S? It may not stay there very long, but it has been formed. And then, of course, then you got to say, okay, have I had any releases? If I haven't, no. Or then by that time, you may have something small. But this is one of the things the EPA has looked at very heavy, is in the process you could actually concentrate something where you're de minimis, you don't include it, and all of a sudden, oh crap, now we've got to refine part, we now have 20% benzene, I'm pulling it way out. But at that point, that's where you have to then start looking at the process. This is where your threshold calculates. And that's what you're saying. This gets a lot more complex than people would realize, but they're kind of looking at it as far as what's really happening. H2S is a perfect example, because it had been reportable up to a certain period of time, then it was vacated, and then they brought it back in for 2012 reporting, and nobody had done anything for a while on it, so it's like hurrying up, and there's not a great way to calculate H2S.
Well, luckily that one has a lot of safety regulations around.
There is a lot of safety regulations as far as emission factors and everything like that, but this was good. And I think what we've done for a lot of our guys who used our chemical engineers, were calculating out based on how much sulfuric acid was produced, and you may know more about this as well, since you do all of those sulfuric acid things, is there's a way to back calculate, and then use stoichiometry to figure out how much H2S would have been formed by the moles of acid or SO2, and I'm like, holy crap, somebody's got nightmares thousands of years ago. So.
Everybody feel comfortable with manufacturing?
Sure.
Much as you want to.
Yeah. Knowledgeable at least.
I think of the three, it has the most components. So the worst is behind you. So processing, this is going to be preparation of a TRI chemical after its manufacture into a product for distribution into commerce. And so this could be products that are used as a formulation component. So this is what you would read on your chemical composition on your MSDS, and incorporated as an article component. This also includes repackaging for distribution, quantities sent off site for recycling, and incidentally including as an impurity. So this, to me, process is where you're going to see a lot more of weight percent type calculations. And otherwise use. So this is going to be our activities that do not fit the description of manufacturing or processing. So items used to support the production process that are not getting incorporated in our final product that's getting shipped into commerce. So this could include things like solvents or manufacturing aids, our ancillary activities like maintenance, fabrication, and installation of process-related equipment. Everybody feeling good about process and otherwise use?
It's one thing of,
Do you want some examples? Would that be examples?
keep in mind, a big error is painting operations. Paint has two components, pigment and solvent. The solvent evaporates to cure the paint when it is sprayed on the substrate. Pigment stays on the tank, or it stays on whatever you're painting. Or making a widget that we're going to sell to commerce, and you paint it. Substrate contains the pigment, that is calculated under process thresholds. The solvent is not meant to stay in the paint, it is used to cure the paint. The solvent is otherwise used. I've seen a lot of errors where people just count all of the paint towards process. They count the toluene or the xylene or the ethylbenzene or the glycol ethers. They count them both to the 25,000 pound threshold. And they're like, oh, haven't exceeded it. I'm like, nope, you're wrong, because you can exceed 10,000 pounds a whole lot faster with the solvent portion of the paint.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say,
Okay.
you're reporting it.
So, and it's something though to be aware of, because you start painting tanks and piping, and it's one of the things, we had a bulk fuel terminal, company bought them, and then they painted all the piping, miles of the piping and all the tanks. They sandblasted and painted the tanks before they put the crude and the gasoline and the diesel in there. Well, the problem is it's a lot of damn paint. It's also outside, and that's good paint. That stuff has to stick. It has to weather through, high, temperatures as far as outside and cold and snow. So this is good paint. They put a primer on it, and they also put the paint on it. When you start to add up those thousands of gallons, they easily triggered the 10,000 pound threshold for otherwise use. The engineer calculated it against 25,000 pounds. So again, you always want to be careful with that. And also when you're doing paint, if you're painting process equipment, both components are hit against the otherwise use threshold. So it's 10,000 pounds, because it's not going out the door for commerce, it is taking care of your existing equipment. So unless you're painting something to be sold, unless that's your type of industry, the maintenance of your operations and your tanks and process equipment, in most cases, you're going to evaluate both the component of pigment as well as the solvent against the otherwise use threshold.
Have a prior owner put in the deal, they get to do all that and just subtract it out of the sale cost.
You're right. You're right.
Away from doing any of it.
What you want to be careful though with is, it's a good thing to have them do the sale cost, but make sure that you tell your contractors to keep track of all the paint and the solvent and the cleanup and everything else, because if you sell it at any time, let's say that they did this place, you put it in, and they were out June 1st, and then you started running it, and they had done all that work, somebody has to fill out the TRI for 2015. So under contract, if you owned it before July 1, you basically are responsible for that work unless it's in the contract that they're responsible for filing for Form R. Because they are at least, at a minimum, they're responsible from January 1 to June 1, and then you're responsible from June 1 to December 31. So you have to, either take that over and make sure that they give you the information so that you can file a Form R. Yeah, it can be a major pain in the butt. We've had to deal with that where people sold off and transferred equipment are like, we don't have to do it. It's like, well, yeah, we do. Still have that responsibility.
So like another example of process would be our raw materials that are coming into the facility that we're going to use to create our final product. So those raw materials, we would evaluate the chemicals in those against the process threshold. And for otherwise use, that's going to be more of like our chillers that are helping facilitate our process, but that ammonia in the chiller is not getting incorporated into our final product. So it's a TRI chemical that's facilitating our operations and is process related, but it's going to be otherwise use because it's not getting incorporated in the final product, if that kind of makes sense. All right, so calculating your activity thresholds. The threshold quantity is the total amount manufactured, processed, or otherwise used, not the amount released. So as Missy said, it's really critical that you start at the beginning. What are my raw materials, what's in them, what's going in, and generating that as your threshold calculation, not what are the emissions from these raw materials, and is that greater than or less than the threshold.
There's some, just as Lauren was saying, what we are finding is a lot of people look at their emission inventory and see what their total emissions are of multiple TRI chemicals, and they're saying, okay, they compare that against the threshold. And the problem is there are qualifiers, like, sulfuric acid, there are times where what is released is actually equal to what's manufactured, but that is not always the case. And so that's why you need to start from the beginning again when you start TRI and not look at your air emissions. You need to look at it and say, well, if I'm burning coal, then whatever sulfuric acid that I create, or HCl, by taking the total amount of coal processed in tons times the emission factor, that actual calculation before control is actually what would be released. That is also what counts toward what you have manufactured. That's okay in that instance, but it's not getting in the habit of looking at your TRI or your emissions inventory and saying, okay, let's look at everything that I released this year and compare that against the thresholds.
And for threshold determinations, TRI chemicals either recycled from spent or contaminated materials or directly reused. Count the original amount only once, so make sure that you're not double counting. And for materials in use from previous years, count only the quantity added during the current reporting year. So a good example of that would be like our catalysts. So the amount that just sat on, from year to year, we don't need to count that, but the amount that you're adding, that's what you would compare against the thresholds.
Okay.
And same for our chillers. So the amount of ammonia that's in your chiller that's just sitting on site consistent from year to year gets to not be incorporated. And then that ammonia that you're adding each year is what you're going to apply to your thresholds.
And that's the same for like what we were talking about with building. Right. The year that you build that tank is the year that you evaluate.
Correct. If you had 100,000 pounds, of steel laying on site, and you did nothing for it for 1 year because you're waiting on your construction permit and it failed to get issued, then the year that you actually start constructing and you start working with that metal and processing that metal to start making what you need, that is the year that you would count for TRI.
And then the years after that.
And then the years after that, you're done. You're not, you process it during that point in time,
Look at all your tanks.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a tank of methanol for calendar year 2014 and it sat there and it was a 100,000 gallon tank, and at the end of 2014 if in the start of 2015, it was the same 100,000 gallons, you just hadn't done with it, you're gonna report for tier 2. You're not gonna report for TRI. If you start drawing off of it and start running it through your system in 2015, now you count how much you've been using, and that counts toward your TRI.
But you still only count the throughput, you don't count
Correct.
what you're actually storing, only count the amount that you.
Only amount that you have used that actually went throughput through your facility to be handled. You know, if you empty out the chiller at December 31st and you fill it January 1, that's where Lauren's saying you start when you fill that in. If on January 1st you have the same ammonia in there, and in March you then put in 20,000 gallons, that 20,000 gallons goes toward your TRI evaluation and any other fill-ups or you know, replenishing that goes on during that calendar year. That's why a lot of times it's nice to take an inventory at the end of the year and at the beginning of the year of what you have, and that's just more accurate. If you don't have that data, then typically you will just add what has been purchased, you know, whatever you want to call it, what's purchased that year is going to be used, or if you actually keep track of tank volume so that you can make sure that you have a starting and ending amount in volume.
And then just keeping in mind that what we have at the end in our waste may be different than what would be applied to your thresholds. Kind of similar to, you know, for various reasons. Either something could fit the de minimis exemption, so you wouldn't need to look at it. You know, just kind of applying everything that you've learned.
Wait, sorry.
Yeah.
Just make sure I understand that. So you're saying like, your calculations for reporting waste are gonna be different for like threshold determinations, because your waste
Exactly.
is sometimes gonna have a higher concentration of certain things that maybe throughout the rest of the process was de minimis?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just for thresholds.
Okay.
So once you exceed the threshold, that waste would then need to be incorporated on your Form-R.
Okay, that's what
So-
I thought, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So this would just be for thresholds. And sometimes that may be the best approach to calculating your threshold, but you just wouldn't want to apply it unilaterally. You know, you'd want to look at things case by case to see what best fits your process and what fits the definition. So to avoid double counting within the same activity, I don't know, Miss, if you want to.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot of times, and I use my video, I use toluene. If you have toluene blended into a product, you know, you're making some paint, and then you're basically packaging, you're blending this in a big gigantic mixed tank. And then you're now putting it into 55-gallon drums. You're processing the same stuff. The big tank had toluene in it, okay? And so you're processing it. So you want to basically take that amount of toluene that's present in that big vat of paint. Well, now you're pouring that paint into 55-gallon drums to now be sold. That is considered repackaging. You don't add the toluene that was present in the big vat and then also the toluene that's present in the drums. That's double counting. That's what we're trying to really make sure. Multiple times, it's also the same thing. Remember we talked about it this morning? That you could literally be, if you made toluene in your plant, you actually made the darn stuff, and then another part of your plant was a paint manufacturing facility, you blended that same amount, you made 100,000 gallons of toluene one year. That same 100,000 gallons of toluene got packaged into 1-gallon containers, and then it also got blended into some paint. The fact is you have manufactured that 100,000 gallons. You've also processed 100,000 gallons. You're not evaluating 200,000 gallons. You're still evaluating 100,000 gallons of toluene. It's just been, that's where I said you check off the box that you checked off manufacturing on the Form-R. You also check off the box for processing. It's the same stuff. But when you're looking at threshold calculation for toluene, using this example, it is not 200,000 gallons, it is 100,000 gallons, obviously converted to pounds. It's the same stuff, and that's why this whole process flow diagram is what's going in, what's going out, overall balance of what's happening. what's coming in, where's it going, and how much goes to product, and then the rest of it is how much got thrown on the ground, how much goes out in the air, how much gets transferred out as a waste stream. TSCA is concerned about the stuff that went out as a commercial product. TRI is concerned about what went out as a release to the environment.
All right, so for our thinking back to when we were talking about our chemical compound categories, so like our glycol ethers or chromium compounds or, our categories. In order to determine if we've exceeded a threshold, we'll count all of it. So you would take all of your glycol ethers within that category and add them all together and apply that against your threshold, not individual glycol ethers or individual compounds. The other thing to take into consideration is that you would use the entire weight of the compound against the thresholds. So not just the copper part, but the full copper compound, that full weight against the threshold. And this is going to be different from our release reporting, which in the instructions specifically asks that during release of compounds, only report that parent metal. So for our copper compounds category, we'll use the full weight of the copper compound for the threshold, and then on our Form R, only the weight of the parent metal. So it's just a nuance with the reporting. And similar for nitrate compounds, these are going to be, the threshold is going to be based on the entire weight of the nitrate compound, and then our Form R is going to reflect releases of just that nitrate ion. So for TRI chemicals in mixtures, for threshold determinations, we're only going to include the portion of the TRI chemical in the mixture, not the entire weight of the mixture. So making sure that we're doing a chemical composition, weight percent calculation. And the de minimis exemption applies to non-PBT chemicals contained in mixtures at less than 1% or 0.1%. And the de minimis exemption is related to the concentration of the chemical in the mixture, not the quantity of the mixture used. Miss, you want to hit the example?
Oh, the metals?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, when we start getting into metals, it's amazing just how people treat metals, but just think of it that metals, alloys, carbon steels, stainless steels, hastelloys, titanium, zinc, whatever, they are a mixture. They're just a solid mixture. So again, it's one of that whole things. I mean, the little things that we see all the time is people forget to convert gallons to pounds. It's easy to do. I've had a guy who calculated all his threshold determinations, and he listed that as his releases, which not good. You want to make sure that, especially for metals, that you look at the concentration of the TRI chemical that is. You want to get a certificate of analysis. MSDSs totally suck for metals. Okay, always get a certificate of analysis, because that is basically the recipe of the batch of metal that has come from the company that is supplying it to you. Certificates of analysis will give you, typically, they'll give you a lot better indication of exactly what the concentration, the weight percent is of a lot of the TRI metals. And why you want to use that is because then you can start throwing half that stuff out for nickel and copper and lead and anything else that is present in the alloys, so you can put that towards de minimis. One thing you want to be careful of, a lot of the foundries that I've done work for, obviously they use a lot of metal, and they get different heats of the metal that come from their suppliers. So what I tell them to do typically is he keeps all the tickets, and we take for 20 heats of a couple 100,000 pounds per heat, we'll take an average of the different tickets, maybe one per month, and then we will average all that together for all the TRI metals so that we can apply that to the total pounds of metal that we had bought. I mean, you can get real tedious on that if you want to and do it per heat, but You just want to look at it and apply it to that metal alloy. The certificates of analysis do a much better job.
All right, so just to go over it again, Section 313 requires facilities to file a TRI Form R or Form A for each TRI chemical or chemical category that exceeds its threshold during the reporting year. And those categories are manufacture, process, or otherwise used. The TRI chemicals for this regulation are included on a list from EPA, which includes over 600 chemicals and various chemical categories. Reports are due July 1st for the prior calendar year, and these reports get submitted to EPA and a designated state. Break.
Does our break coincide with the break for the they normally have scheduled?
They want us to go all the way to 3.
Okay, what time is it?
2:30.
2:30.
I don't need a break yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's just, what do you do? Okay.
Any questions up to this part? Alrighty. Getting into the details. Calculating releases and completing the forms. All right. Miss, you want to trade off for a little? Here you go.
Oh, man, I forgot about the, I keep trying to forget about this, you know? Do you want me to wait for Ron or no? Okay. I mean, basically here, what we're going to hit here, I mean, we've got the applicability thing beat to death. So now we can take a look at some of the release calcs. Typically, even from EPA's point of view, they're going to spend most of their time, if they're doing an evaluation or any type of a data quality analysis or an audit, they're going to base it on the applicability portion and less of it on the release portion. But typically, because you have better paperwork that certifies what you have for the release instance, and you're just taking already generated data from, you know, hazardous waste reports, manifests, and air, and just transfer them over. When they talk about the maximum on-site code, this isn't the one like you have from Tier 2. What we're really trying to look at is not the mixture that it's in, which is what Tier 2 would cover. It's actually where the TRI chemical is contained in, because you could have that in multiple places and you could stockpile that. You may not have over, you know, Tier 2 evaluates over at any one time. Well, let's say you have 20,000 pounds of something at any one time. That is going to be the maximum amount that you ever have. Well, you could have that occur every month. So you're going to be processing a whole lot more about the maximum that's on site. So we want to look at, during the reporting year of the chemical, what is the maximum on site for that particular TRI chemical. That total doesn't include any exempt materials. And again, when we talk about, let's get back to the catalyst that you have, Tricia, is let's say you have 10 different types of catalyst that you have on site. 3 of them may have de minimis levels of TRI in them, so you wouldn't include that. However, when you're looking at the maximum on site, you may look at aggregating the de minimis amount of it as well as what is for those products that are over the de minimis amount. And you would look at all material storage locations everywhere. I mean, again, it's aggregated for your facility. It is not for just one particular type of material. You would also want to look at your processes and your waste. So what you've got in the tanks, what you've got in the piping, what you've got in your process equipment, you want to include that amount of mixture as well. So it could very well be that what you have on site sitting outside or sitting in outdoor above ground storage tank is full, then you have maybe an equivalent amount that is inside in your process and production facility, and then you may have some satellite storage and shipping or a warehouse on site that is storing some of that processed material that still contains that TRI chemical. All of that's going to be included when you put this on your maximum on site. When we look at calculating the releases, and again, all this continues to come about talking about documentation and making sure that you have a good arm around all of your processes, what you've got, all the activities. You want to make sure and consider all the activities and all the sources, and there's going to be a lot of them, and especially when you have bigger facilities, it takes a fair amount, but it's also, once you have this down, you have a good site layout, you have a good process flow diagram, then it's just upkeep. And then again, we keep talking about, you're going to continue to know more and more of your process as you stay there longer and longer. So one of the things that is really important is tracking. This is for tier 2 as well. Tracking the chemicals that are coming into your facility. Your facility people, your maintenance people, your purchasing people, those are people who need to understand how important it is to know what they are buying and bringing to your site, okay? I have done presentations of EPCRA, jacked it down, way down on the technical side, that I've talked to purchasing people so that they understood how much hell they could give their EHS people by not telling them all these lovely products but production wants and that, the maintenance guys want. So here, yeah, use your credit card. You can go buy this stuff, and we'll just circumvent our system for a normal purchasing. It's really a pain, and if they continue to buy that stuff and you don't know about it, then you're the one who ends up getting penalized, at least from the fact that you don't get the chance to evaluate everything, and here you are in December and you're going, where'd this come from? What is it? So it's educating them. It's making sure that, asking them. I don't know of any company yet that doesn't have their maintenance people buying chemicals separate from SAP or anything else. Nobody's got that type of hold. You have emergencies, you have some things where they just need something right off the bat, or maybe they have another facility who had excess and they're like, yeah, we could use it, so ship it on over, and then it follows a different routing structure because it's not being directly purchased. You want to keep an eye on contractors. That is probably a headache beyond all headaches, but when contractors bring in, two things. One, the first time that they're coming in, and you're going to have some control, but you also need to talk to plant engineering. If you've got maintenance activities coming in, contracted activities, find out before they even set foot what chemicals are they bringing on site, especially if it's painting or they're going to do sandblasting or anything else. Make sure that you have a form that they have to submit the MSDS for everything that they're going to be used, and that it's pre-approved by you. Because guess what? You need to make sure that you hold them accountable so that they fill in and give you either weekly or daily or however, end of job, how much they have used in pounds of each of the materials that they have brought in. And they need to give that to you. So you should have the MSDS, you should have the their inventory of how much they've brought in and how much they've used. If they've taken some off site because they didn't use as much, fine, let you know. The more accurate, the better. Any direct and indirect materials. I mean, we're looking at capital purchases. If they're bringing in chillers, well, they don't work by themselves. It's kind of like that whole thing of, if you bring in a new forklift or you bring in an automobile, it doesn't do any polluting, it doesn't do anything wrong until you plug it in, you start putting fuel in it or ammonia, and it's running. You need to know when that's scheduled. And again, drop a note. I always keep a folder. When I was back at the plant, I would keep a folder for TRI, and I would just have my little sticky notes. And if something new was come in, or we got a construction permit, a new air permit, and we started running through process equipment or anything that was coming in that might be used in a chemical, I drop a note in of the date that it went into play and when they put in chemical. You can add it to your spreadsheet. You want to talk to purchasing. Make sure that you know when new things come in. I don't know. Some places do, some places don't. Before a chemical can even be purchased at some facilities, you should be able to take a look at it, one, from a safety standpoint, but two, from an environmental standpoint. And then your purchasing people need to know, how are we going, how is this being ordered? Do you order it by 2 pallets at a time? What happens, how much is on site before they have a reorder? There's ways you can play that system so that you stay under 10,000 pounds. You know, for Homeland Security stuff, we try to do it so don't order any more than you have to, so you stay out of CFATs. But again, you may not be able to, but there is ways to work with the system. So always make sure you understand, because you know what that's going to mess with? If you've got 20 drums, and at 18 is when purchasing is told to start buying another shipment because it takes a couple of weeks. Well, what if they drop off another 20 drums next week? You know, it's like, oh, it was on the way. We had some extra space in the truck. We can drop it off. That alters your maximum on site. It alters your inventory, changes everything, especially for Tier 2, but even for TRI, there's an impact. The credit card. We had so many guys over at the car plant that oh yeah, just put on the credit card. We had all sorts of new chemicals coming in. Well, guess what? EPA will look at it. If you get an MSDS for a product, what they like to do on their audits is they walk in, open up your MSDS book, and go ding. They just pick something, like pick a card, any card. Open it up, and they say, all right, show me where this is and show me how much you bought and how much you used this year. You know, if you get that proverbial, you know, deer in the headlight look, doesn't go over well. They want you to follow through. They want it opened up, they want to know how much you bought, and they want to see the determination that you evaluated it for TRI or for Tier 2. So that's why it's very important. Byproducts, intermediates, you need to also be aware. Again, it's knowing your process. Talk to your process engineers. Get a better idea of, well, how's this going to work? What are we going to be doing here? Even taking your existing TRI documentation and basically getting comfortable again. Help go over this with me so that I make sure I have a good idea about what we are doing right here. Never hurts. This is not just on you. I have already had my lovely little lectures with some of my environmental engineers at some different plants. And I'm like, this isn't all your job. You are not the one who's totally accountable. Use the resources you have. It isn't purchasing's job. You shouldn't have to bug them, but you do have to bug them. But you have to talk to purchasing. You have to talk to maintenance. They should provide you a report after the first of the year for the prior calendar year of what they've been doing. You know, you can see, you know, I know that we have nothing better to do with our time as environmental engineers at a site, but it's just like when you're having to spend countless hours trying to herd the cats around there, especially since, you know, production people just really think that it is a major pain for you to be bothering them because you're doing non-value added work such as environmental. You've got to have this information. It's got to be accurate. And if of course you have to go in and tell your plant manager, it's like, you know, you are the one signing this, so if these guys aren't giving me the information, I'll babysit your boat and babysit the place while you're, you know, wearing your striped pajamas. Have a good time. It is one of those things that there is accountability no matter what. And being comprehensive. The tools and the data that you're using for doing your release calculations, always keep an eye on and keep track, if you don't already, keep track of what you've been doing over the previous 5 years, even 10. You can see trends. You want to make sure that you're staying within, you know, if you had a really good market, great. 2008 wasn't so good. You're going to see some dips down, starting to come back up in 2009. You should be fairly consistent. You should be able, though, that if you see a spike, know why. And you want to take a look at your process flow diagrams. It's always good to have them updated. Obviously, you have environmental monitoring data, or maybe you don't. But if you have a CEM, if you have stack tests, use the latest one. If you did a stack test in 2014 in April, do not use that stack test for, let me make sure I have the right thing. If you do a stack test in, let's say that we're in 2015. So if I do a stack test this April, unless if you perfectly sure that nothing changed during 2014, yeah, you can use that stack test. But if you have an earlier stack test that's more indicative of what you have done and changed, I would use it. You want to just make sure that you're using the right data for the year that you're reporting, because it's the prior year. And when you do have changes in feed and intermediates and new changes, try to keep in mind what data is really the most representative of what we're doing right now. Waste profiles change. You want to just make sure that you keep that data. Waste profiles, maybe you get a whole new set and you have them redone every 3 years. Put copies of those in your backup documentation files. Be very comprehensive to document everything that you've done. Permit applications, EPCRA, I mean, you're looking at your Clean Air Act, all of your reports, especially on your calculation spreadsheets for thresholds, refer to those documents. It's okay to refer them in a format, but make sure you have the dates right. If you're doing 2014 reporting, make sure that you change it for the next year, that this is for 2015 reporting or for 2014. I have gone in before on some spreadsheets and there was 6 different years of dates and I really didn't know what I was looking at. So my audit finding was this is a mess and you need to have it redone. I couldn't follow it, and if I can't follow it, then EPA is not going to follow it. You know, you can't be sloppy. Other tools and data sources, obviously manifest invoices. Lauren and I were talking about, you know, asking your battery manufacturers to send you a list to do the calculations. More and more companies that handle your waste will also send you TRI data reports so that you don't have to do it. They'll send you a list of all your manifests. They'll send everything you can compare against it. You can actually hand that to somebody administrative to go through, but they can actually calculate out and give you an idea of what you've done, what you've sent to them. It's getting pretty helpful from their standpoint as well. It's an added value-added thing that they do. It helps them keep track. It's good for their business because they're giving it to you, and it does take some of the worry off your end. And then you do a periodic check on it. Engineering calculations, EPA guidance. Again, the whole thing is documentation, and we just can't reiterate that more. It is documentation all the time. And year to year, make copies or put a copy of the first page of a guidance document and refer to it. That is what goes into your file every year. You know, carrying some of this stuff over. If you've got reference documents that you continue to use, copy them and put them into the next year's file, especially if they're electronic. It's a whole lot easier and it keeps up. I've gone back to try to find out where did they get this stupid emission factor. Well, it was 15 years old and it was written on a piece of paper and it had a footnote and it was in a file way, way back. I mean, I didn't have to go back that many years, but now I was eager. I had to find out where this came from. But 15 years ago, make the notes and put that note and copy it and put it back in there. But again, if you're using 15-year-old guidance, I'd love to come audit your facility because that means nobody, you know, it's been ignored for a while. For air release, we'll go through some of it. For calculation tools, I mean, there's a lot of industry guidance. There's a lot of industry guidance by your trade associations, by EPA, obviously AP42, tanks. You know, Water 9 is now getting replaced by ToxChem. We actually are starting to do some of that training on ToxChem, and it's really a much better system because I believe from EPA is that Water 9 is just pretty much going out the door. They're not going to fix it. They're not going to try to mess with it, so they're just not even using it. For refineries, there was an emission estimation protocol that was out in 2009. I do understand that some of their hydrogen cyanide levels and H2S numbers were a little on the high side, so if you have better data, use it. But that is, you know, all these documents are really good to help out for up-to-date emission factors for your operations. Obviously, you have your air permit application, you have your Title V, your emission inventories, published emission factors, you have stack tests, you have CEMS data. If you have a similar facility that you're pretty much running the same products through, you can share information for emission estimations, okay? You can do that. You want to document it, and that, you know, this is our sister facility. We have fundamentally the same operations and the same throughputs, and we have the same, you know, catalysts and yada, yada, yada. You can use that documentation data. It's most readily available. It doesn't mean you have to go create and go run stack tests or install CM or flow meters or anything else. Use the best available data, but there is a lot of good data out there. Use it. And it doesn't hurt to update. It doesn't hurt to update your assumptions. Just do it, document it, and move on. For water, obviously you're going to be using DMRs. You may have other data that is in your NPDES permit application. And if you don't have the monitoring data, again, there's a lot of times you can use it based on process knowledge, mass balance. Use the best available information that you have. Talking to your process guys, talking to your process engineers, talking to your maintenance guys. Again, that's the information that you can go with. You don't have to start creating something and, you know, starting up a whole brand new research paper just on your facility. For waste, usually that's a little more straightforward. We're looking at manifest, vendor receipts, solid waste reports. I mean, you have semi-annual or annual hazardous waste reports. You do have solid waste reports. You want to take a look at it. Solid waste you're going to get involved in more if there's a chance that you have dry product or metals or anything you're processing and it gets on the floor and you sweep it up and goes into the trash. Sometimes you do have to make that estimate that, I mean, literally, you can do a swag. You can do, okay, you know, we use 25,000 pounds of this stuff. We're going to assume 1% is making it somewhere else than the intended place, and it's going out in the trash. I mean, it's really that documentation that you're doing an engineering estimate. You want to look at all sources. Again, what we were talking about, look at your startup shutdown mode functions, you know, look at your spills. You got to pull all that together. I mean, if you have any spills during the year, SSM events, any of that, all of that should be added together or pulled together, especially for when you're triggering so that you know what chemical was released. And then if you have to report it on Form R, that's also incorporated here. Because, you know, not that we routinely have spills, but some people do. I mean, it's just life. I mean, this is, you know, human error, but you need to make sure that you account for all of those spills and SSM upsets, or if something broke down or you had a valve break, any of that. That information, especially if it is dealing with a TRI chemical, needs to be evaluated and needs to be utilized in the report. Data precision, Lauren, kick in anytime here, but when you are looking at non-PBT chemicals, you enter whole numbers. If you have PBT chemicals, they allow you to have decimal reporting. Typically, they allow 2 significant figures. You know, you got to look at the precision of data. I hate looking at these Form R reports where you have, you know, 15 values, you know, numbered significant digits over on the right side of the decimal point. It's like nobody gets that. Nobody gets that. Crazy. I mean, come on. Drop it down to 2 and move on.
The only one, dioxin gets 7 decimal points.
Oh, that's right. Got to have an outlier. Well, what is it? It's grams, you know, or something, so, you know.
Micrograms.
Yeah, micrograms. Yeah, there you go, yeah. There's also, and I don't know too many people who use this still, but maybe some of the smaller companies who do some of this stuff in-house. If you're looking at a non-PBT chemical, you can use range codes, A, B, or C, and that's basically up to 1,000 pounds. You know, for PBT chemicals, you really need to have some type of a level of precision that's supported by some data, and that's typically fairly easy to pull together when you're looking at, even if you're using a mass balance or using an emission estimate. As you know, Lauren was saying, you're looking at PBT chemicals, you know, 100 micrograms for dioxin typically is going to be the smallest amount that's required. You know, mercury is 10 pounds, so you can actually round down to 0. That if you're less than 0.05 pounds, you can put 0. You don't put Na, you put 0. And then for dioxins, it's less than 50 micrograms. When we talk about Na versus 0, we've seen many of these. Not applicable means that there is absolutely no possibility that TRI chemical could be present, released, transferred, or managed in that media. If there is absolutely no way in hell, then you put Na. Okay? It's pretty simple. If you don't handle toluene in anything you have, put Na. If for some reason, you know, I mean, again, you're trying to look at the fact that you don't have chemicals normally present in your waste streams. If it's just not there and you don't handle it, then it can't be in a waste stream. Okay. Zero is if that you have no release occurring or it is less than that 0.5 pounds. In most cases, you're going, if there's just no way that it's going to go, if you don't have outfalls, if everything, let's say that everything was contained and everything got routed through a thermal oxidizer that was, 100% efficient, we know that doesn't exist, but they're darn close, then you could put NA. But in most cases, always default to 0. NA gives EPA, we've seen where NA in fugitive emissions for some big industries, but they have a lot of point source emissions. You can't have NA, you're going to have fugitive emissions at some point. If you've got point source emissions, you've got fugitive emissions. It's just going to be there. Put 0. However, make a reasonable estimate. Now, if you think if everything's going out one stack, okay, yippee for you, but put 0. Do not put NA. That's like little alarm bells go off in EPA. They're just like, really, 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 Again, for release estimates is use the best available information. It's no different than when you are doing threshold calculations. Use the best available information. Again, and we reiterate, some of the stuff just seems stupidly logical, but the TRI chemical that is present in the waste stream is what you are reporting, not the whole mixture. I told you, I had a guy, he used a lot of paints. He did the threshold calculations. He put those numbers in as the releases. And it was just like, no. He put the whole mixture in as the release. So he painted, and 100% of everything went as an air release. So I'm like, God, you guys didn't make much money that year, did you? Why I got concerned is I'm like, how can you have 50,000 pounds of, toluene, and methanol, xylene, and ethylbenzene going out the door when you have a thermal oxidizer? And I was told it runs. And what we found out is that he had reported the thresholds as releases, and he forgot to apply the thermal oxidizer of 98.5% destruction efficiency. So of course, when we found this out, we redid the Form Rs, and now you're down to 10 pounds of each. You got those super red flags and a call from EPA of, do you know what you're doing? It's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. We're making it right, But it was significantly down, and so. Again, you will get the red flags, and you'll get EPA will be looking at, what are you doing? And it's like, okay, it's big changes. We had a facility that was making gypsum board. Okay, they're making gypsum board. Now, you have diisocyanates that get in there, right? Well, when you use a diisocyanate resin, it is meant to cross-link. It is the polymer, the chemistry. And guess what? Once they react, you have no more diisocyanates, right? It's gone. It's gone. Well, they used millions of pounds of diisocyanates. Well, of course, if any of that outfall off the gypsum board that gets made is junky or it's broken, you send out a lot of pounds of gypsum board, and it's heavy, okay? So you send out thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of waste gypsum board. They applied the diisocyanates concentration to the outgoing waste. And so they were shipping off millions of pounds every year of diisocyanates to a landfill. And of course, my husband works for a company that uses diisocyanates. And I was just like, this is really bad. And so I was like, the chemistry is that it no longer is there. It's reacted. It is done. You don't have anything else. So here they are using lots of diisocyanates going in. We triggered reporting. The releases of diisocyanates were minuscule because they are PBTs, so there is no de minimis, but you put that into the MDI calculator that was developed by the polyurethane industry, and you're like, 0.85 pounds or maybe 1 pound of something going out into the air, and 0 releases to the landfill. Of course, that one really had, I mean, I got a phone call from EPA when that one got said. It's like, how could this happen? And I'm like, because people were stupid and didn't know what they were doing. You know, but I mean, again, what had happened is the gal who took over after the environmental guy quit or retired or whatever he did, the gal who took over really didn't know anything about TRI. So she followed what the spreadsheets did. And she just filled in the same thing on the spreadsheets that they'd done all the years before. She had no idea about thresholds, so they were reporting 9 chemicals. After we got done, they were reporting 1 chemical at a significantly reduced amount of emissions going out the door. So again, this is the one that had the 15-year-old, you know, guidance document that we couldn't seem to find out where the heck they got the emission factor, and it was for MDI. So, and it was like, you know, pounds of MDI emitted per something. So, I mean, it was already disgustingly wrong. So, and again, this is that whole thing of using the best available data. It's making sure that the people who are inheriting this lovely regulation, you know, compliance job, that they know exactly how the rule works, because it is literally the trash in, trash out. And again, we talked, if you've got VOCs, I'm sorry, you're not going to have 0 emissions, okay? If somebody wants to explain how that happens, you know, if you're in a glass bubble and it's sealed and nothing can get out, I totally agree with you. It's all cool. It's all cool. But make sure you differentiate between fugitive and stack emissions. Interestingly enough, a lot of this time is, again, you have an emission inventory that you got to submit. You don't normally have to break that out unless you're a named resource. You know, you're a named source. Well, TRI actually is created where you have to separate it out, and you have to, when you report PM, now you have to understand what is making up the PM. You have to do the speciation, because we just reported particulate matter. Well, if it's got nickel in it and it's got manganese, it's still PM, but it's nickel and manganese. You have to break it out. I've actually gotten involved doing the TRI and found out that they were doing their emission inventory wrong. Because we had to take the PM, then we had to speciate so that we could do the TRI. So then we found errors in the air emission inventory, so we got the TRI done first, got it correct, and then we went back and recalculated the emission inventory. Don't forget indirect water discharges from stormwater, that those must be considered. You never know what's coming in there. A lot of times you have to do sampling. Lauren, kick in any time, because I am not a water person whatsoever.
Yeah, so again, it's the best available information. So if you don't normally take sampling, you don't have to go out and take sampling for TRI. Just use what you have and what seems reasonable. As a part of your DMRs, you may have sampling data, but maybe not flow information. So just making an estimate based on flow. And I know we have several clients. EPA suggests to determine that stormwater calculation, taking your area of the watershed times the rainfall, but that can give you a really high flow if maybe that's not actually what's happening. So then all of a sudden you have all these pounds going to stormwater, you know, when maybe that's not what's actually happening. So just keeping in mind that you want to try to be accurate.
Right.
Because over-reporting can
Yeah.
backfire. Being
Right.
overly conservative, you know, can
Right.
backfire just as well as under-conservative.
Right. Actually, EPA considers over-reporting. That's not good, but under-reporting is also bad. But over-reporting is also considered almost equivalent in violation, because they want to make sure that, you know, if you're over-reporting, again, it skews your national emission inventory. It's what they use for developing MAC standards. I mean, this stuff feeds an amazing amount of regulatory arenas just besides air or water or anything else. Watch out for releases of TRI chemicals with qualifiers. Remember, aluminum oxide is fibrous. Sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid must be aerosol, mist, fume. Zinc is abused a lot. Zinc is only reportable as a fume or dust. You have to start grinding on something in order to generate a fume or dust. And you basically take let's say that you have a dust collector and you're doing a bunch of grinding on zinc. What you want to do is you take the total amount of your bag house collection of the dust and divide it by the capture and collection efficiency, and that'll give you how much dust went to it before it was controlled. That is what applies to your threshold determination.
But where's the drop off between powder and dust? Like if you're purchasing zinc oxide powder, you only report zinc dust.
If you're buying a zinc powder, I'll tell you exactly how I would look at it. And Lauren, you know, if you kick in on how you, and if we differ, then okay, that's opinions. But if you're bringing in a zinc powder and you are, what are we doing with it? Talk to me about what you're doing with it.
Since you're mixing it with hydrochloric acid to make zinc
Okay. Okay. Here's the way I would look at it is, let's say that you're pouring it into an open top tank and you create a cloud of zinc dust. I would, if I was the sick person that I am, if you were pouring it in there and it was just an open top and you kind of generate it where now it's flowing to the ground, you know, a nice film, I would take that amount that was generated by the dumping it into that tank. I would take that amount that basically clouded up and then fell to the ground toward your threshold calculation. Okay, the whole content, it is zinc dust. I mean, a zinc powder. It's all in there. Would you count that toward? I mean, I guess if you want to say,
So
would you count the whole zinc powder and say, okay, we've processed 100,000 pounds of zinc powder? You're not making a dust.
We just did something really similar for a foundry, in which they're taking powders to make like their castings and molds. And when I say just did this, it was like 2 years ago. So let me go on my computer and I can actually give you like an answer.
Another example of this would be probably one that when they're doing coating on casting,
Okay, yeah.
aluminum.
Yeah, so that's exactly
Right, right. No, that'd be good. I'd like to take a look at that because because you're buying it in a particulate form. You know, the issue is yeah, you already bought a powder, but the way I've always kind of looked at the zinc or the aluminum fume or dust is that you were, again, it's only reportable if you've created a fume or a dust, which you're buying it. My thing would be is that you're having to activate either a metal or you are melting zinc or aluminum where you're creating a potential fume. But I'd like to see what, that was probably for, I know who we're talking about. Okay. I don't remember what we had calculated on that, but I know it wasn't, I don't believe it was 100% of what they brought in is what we calculated out. But, yep.
if you have like zinc and like stormwater, and you don't actually produce anything with zinc. I mean, I know it's a problem in municipalities, like, from just traffic. I mean, is that considered dust? I mean,
Well, that's an interesting question. We had a discussion with one of our clients on that because they couldn't figure out why they're getting zinc in their outfall. They had no idea where it was coming from. And we figured it out. And talk about a swag on what we developed on this. But here's what happened. All of their storm water was gathered on site in these little troughs that then went to their wastewater treatment plant. What we found out, they were like, we don't use zinc. We don't have anything that we use zinc. And I said, it's got to be somewhere. Well, periodically, they'd sandblast outdoor pipe racks and building components. And guess what was in the primer of the pipe rack coating and the building coating? The primer contained zinc, very common pigment in paint. So what they did is they power washed or sandblasted the pipe racks, sandblasted equipment, and they would attempt to cover up what they could. And then they would sandblast it, and then they'd repaint it. Well, when you're sandblasting, you're pulling off the paint off the metal, right? Most of it's going to gather, most of it's going to fall to the ground. So you're basically got the sandblast material, which would be totally inert, no TRI chemical in it, but the paint that was on those, that was previously on there, the old paint, is now coming off, and that contains zinc. What we believe what was happening is if they did not sufficiently cover the whole area that they were doing, it was getting washed off rain, falling on the ground, and then ultimately getting washed off at some point into the stormwater collection ponds and going toward wastewater, and that's where it was coming out in the wastewater. So we developed a lovely swag calculation based on how much painting they were doing, taking a certain percentage of the sandblast material that was being sent out, you know, that was manifested as a waste material that went out the door, and calculating out that of the paint that was coming off, there would be X pounds per, you know, let's say that they used 100,000 pounds of sandblast material, and they probably took with them maybe 25,000 pounds of the paint off the sandblast material after, you know, completing the process. And then they said, let's say that 2% of it actually stayed on the ground, that it got washed off, and that was what was showing up in the water, and that's how we did the calculation. Yeah, they had no, I was like, I mean, it was interesting how we were coming up with it. He goes, well, we can't calculate that. I go, sure you can. Engineering estimate.
So did you use that number as the releases, or would you just
Releases.
use what you actually found in the water?
For the threshold, we did that for the threshold, we did that whole calculation of here's how much sandblast paint, here's how much it was otherwise used, I mean, how much we pulled off, and then we apply, I think that's what we applied as threshold, and then we looked at the,
If you were to exceed the threshold, then
right,
you would use that stormwater.
Stormwater.
Releases,
right.
but first you'd have to exceed the threshold. So I think in that case we didn't.
Yeah, I think we found out that we did not, yeah.
I think the original scenario was that they were reporting
That's right.
consumer dust, and we're like, like from what, you know? And so that was more to show we've got less than 10,000 pounds of zinc in.
Yeah, they were reporting, that's right, they were reporting, every year they were reporting zinc as fume or dust. And we're like, well, what's the basis of this? Like, well, we just think that it's coming off somehow because we're finding it in our wastewater. And we're like, huh? You know, so that's where we came up with this. So we developed that conclusion that that's where it was coming from. And so then we tried to figure out of approximately, since they always sandblasted and then they always painted, we basically figured out how much paint that they used that year to replace, and then did a calculation for it, and it was showing, they weren't even doing that calculation. We told them to take the amount of paint that was, primer paint that was used to paint, calculate out to see if they used 10,000 pounds of zinc, and then what we then decided is we would calculate out if they even came close to 10,000 pounds, then we'd do more of a calculation to determine that the sand blasting operation would have created zinc dust by blasting off the paint, and then we would use what came out in the DMR to be their actual release.
But just because you have zinc on your DMR doesn't mean you exceeded a threshold.
Correct.
So once you determine that you exceed zinc threshold, then you would incorporate that stormwater data, but just because it's in your stormwater.
Just because it's in your stormwater and you have no other idea. If you're not handling zinc anywhere else, then it's either incoming somewhere else or something else is contributing to it. But you have to exceed a zinc fume or dust threshold in order to trigger using the water analysis for your release calculation.
But you'd have to figure out where it came from. You can't just, if somebody came through an auditor, you can't just
Right.
say, well,
Right.
or
So that's where that was our estimate.
like our parking lots and runoff and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And quite frankly, it's just like if you got the water in there, it's like you could look at zinc that, you know, it's like we don't use anything zinc based, so we're not creating any fume or dust. Next, you know, maybe present in the water, but at this point, it's just some addressed. They were getting enough of it though that they were reporting zinc. They were reporting for a TRI chemical that we didn't think that they needed to be reporting for, but they had no documentation to support why they were reporting for it, and we thought that that was a, I know.
It tied in with overestimating how much your stormwater flow is. So their calculated amount of zinc using their DMR times like an overly conservative flow value was giving them all these pounds and pounds of zinc in the water, and we were like,
How, yeah,
like
what are you doing, you know?
really good.
So that's one of the things that we get into is when we talk about doing an assessment instead of an audit. It's just basically going, are you accounting for everything right? And if you have something that you think is there, well, let's ground truth it to at least come up with some viable discussion of why you're reporting it or what is going on or why something doesn't apply. I mean, here for TRI world, much like air, you sometimes have to disprove that it applies to you in some manner. You know, you're a Title V, that's good. From the standpoint that you got a lot of sources out there that they're like, well, we're small, we don't have an air permit, we don't need one. How do you know that?
Yeah.
How do you know that? Just because you're small means you could be mighty, you know? So it's, you have to disprove that, no, we're not subject to this, or we're not subject to air permitting because we are truly a small source. I'm like, well, show me your PTE. And they're like, what's PTE? And I'm like, well, you obviously don't have any idea what, you know, potential to, see, you even knew that. See, good for you. See?
I see, if you want to take a break.
Yeah, sounds good.
Section 8. So what is Section 8? And this is what is the last page of your Form R, and it looks like a big summary table. And that's what it is. It's a summary of all the releases that you entered in your previous sections. And it also includes a comparison to the releases that you reported for the prior year. And so common errors, earlier reporting years, mistakes on the forms were made in Section 8. And make sure that you check your numbers. So past years may need updates, public databases. I don't know. Miss, do you want to explain these bullets? I don't know. The last couple.
Oh, common errors, yeah. Oh, you want to check the numbers. I had actually, I had an intern and I was like, this is really easy because our spreadsheet is actually set up, we have a tab that's set up just like the Section 8 so that everything can be done. And they've juxtaposed the numbers. They've had, you know, you look at it because it says, here's the current year, then you have the prior year, and you have the next, year after. And it's just making sure that the numbers are right, because we've gone back to look at prior reports from people, and the numbers that they had don't match up. I mean, it should be that when you're doing the Form R, that, like, we're gonna do 2014 Form R. So I'm gonna have brand new numbers go in for Form R, right? Because these are what my calculations for. But for 2013, that number should match the numbers that are in there, or I calculate out. I want to make sure that it matches what I pull off the 2013 Form R. And what we have found is we've gone and looked at the 2013 Form R for our clients, and we make sure that the number is correct on the actual Form R. When we go back to their documentation, the numbers are different. And again, it's just making sure that a lot of this is just, you get dyslexic, your brain is befuddled, you're tired, you're sick of looking at this spreadsheet, and by this time, especially from our case, we're sick of looking at everybody's spreadsheet. So by that time, it's just making sure to have another set of eyes look at it. Public databases, this is another real key thing. The public, they like to think they really know what all is going on. They look at Section 8. And we actually I got a call last year from one of our offices, and what had happened, this is an interesting one. The public had a YouTube video in a town where they were pissed off at the refinery, okay? They just were mad at the refinery. How dare they in there, even though the whole town is, working there and it's all their jobs. They had a YouTube video, and they were going on about how many pounds of all their emissions were. The environmental guy was like, something's wrong. And they were showing signs with the numbers. And he went back, and then they ended up calling us. They actually went back and were trying to figure out because the numbers didn't match what were on the TRI database. They don't know where they got the numbers from. It didn't match what they submitted. So they were trying to ground truth and make sure, where would the public have got these numbers? screenshots, stuff. Where did they get these numbers and why didn't it match what they submitted on their forms? So again, then you had a public relations nightmare. Why was this a public relations nightmare? Because the numbers that the public was putting up in the YouTube video were orders of magnitude less than what they had reported. So here they are getting a whole bunch of crap already.
Right.
And the company's going, hey, you're off by a factor of 300, you know, so again, it's one of those,
Yeah,
it's
much worse
like,
than you
really
think it
make
is.
sure, you know, and again, this is, you know, the activity
I
ratio.
think you're mad now.
This year, I believe, this is one of the things that I remember reading a couple of weeks ago. The activity ratio, you now specify if it's an activity ratio or it's a production ratio.
Yeah.
You have one or the other. So again, they're really trying to hone in on why the numbers may differ between year to year and what that could be due to.
Yeah, and so that production ratio is just representing your production last year over your production this year so they can see, or this year over last year. Yep. All right, and last but not least, signing the Form R. Your certifying officials must submit their ESA, electronic signature agreement. This only has to be completed once. Just anytime you have a new certifying official, make sure to get it done, and that's within the CDX TriMeWeb system. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. So most people get approved online in real time. If that doesn't work for you, then you have to mail in a signature form, and you just want to make sure that you leave enough time for that. Break! Just kidding.
So what was, what, did they ever figure out what had, why the company had those numbers? Is it just because online section eight was different for them? I never heard an answer to that. I was kind of, I went in and I said, well, I can come out and we'll take a look. Well, we're taking a look at stuff right now, and then they didn't hear anything, which of course gave me one, so, what happened? But what I think is that, you know, it's like, okay, do I ask it or do I not ask it? I think that what happened is, and it could very well be, I think that they were public, whoever were they, I think they were looking at some different number, and they were looking at trends from, for TRI databases, trends for all industry, and, or, and not necessarily looking at
Not that
facility,
particular
yeah, they may not have been looking for that particular facility, but I, you know, I just went on the TRI database looking at the trends for 2015, and I mean, it's interesting to see like 2000 who the top 10 and, you know, sectors were, and then now who the top 10 and then what were the top 10, you know, chemicals that were reported on TRI and how they're all the same chemicals. It's interesting to see how they've gone from being the number ones, like ammonia was way up high in 2000 and now it's down at the bottom. It's like number 9 or number 10. Metal mining industry is killing. I mean, it's skewing the numbers to that. It's unbelievable. And that's just putting metal mining waste and stuff when they're processing and putting it back into the we're talking, you know, the billions of pounds here, you know.
You know,
Really?
Working with community groups is always interesting. Never know what people
Yeah.
And a lot of times they have the best of intentions, and I want to give them credit for, like, I really
For
care
at
that
least
they
time,
care.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's awesome that they
Yeah.
care. You know, we want to make the community safer or whatever. But it's like, hey, step back a minute and look at the
Exactly.
let's do this right.
Yeah. All right, so next section is just going to be touching on the importance of good record keeping and documentation. And kind of like we've already been reiterating through this whole thing, just making sure that you're keeping not only your calculations on site, but that you have all of your backup documentation on site that you use to populate those calculations. So your waste manifests, your emission inventory, whatever you're using, making sure that you're keeping that on site with your calculation file. Making sure that everything's well labeled, documented, that assumptions are in there. And this also helps ensure consistency from year to year, especially if there's a personnel change, which is where we see the majority of the problems can arise. And there is a 40 CFR requirement that you must keep these records for the Form R for 3 years. And as we discussed, the statute of limitations is 5 years. So EPA can bust you for 5 years, but you're required to keep 3 years worth of data on site.
So they could theoretically, like, if you've done your data, like, this records destruction, like, they could bust you for something
No,
So there's varying schools of thought on that.
The thing is here's why they can go back. If they do an audit on you, they're gonna tip they do their quality assessment on you. They're gonna look at last year's TRI, okay? They find errors in it such that they believe you should have reported a particular chemical. They'll go back prior year. If you missed it then they'll go back one more year. If you missed it then, what they basically assume is this is consistent and you have just missed it. So they will issue you a notice of violation and give you a penalty basically for 5 years because the last 3 years are indicative that you missed it. Now, if it's something that you evaluated at the prior year and it did not meet a threshold or something, then you're okay. When I was at General Motors, we used a lead, the ELPO, it's called the ELPO, electric deposition coating, and that's the first paint that goes on a vehicle before you put the base coat, the clear coat, the top coat on. And we had an 800,000 gallon bath that this stuff would go into, electrically charged, good stuff. Well, the plant was built in 1985, 1982, something like that. When it's built. Well, you have an 800,000 gallon tank. The damn paint was 3% lead. Of course you're reporting for lead. You always are gonna, go past over 25,000 pounds, right? Well, we had a consultant. I had just started at the company, and it was gonna be TRI season, and we had a consultant do it the prior couple of years. And I am there, maybe I'm there for a couple of months, got audited by EPA. And I mean, I was terrified what was going to go on. Now next year, I had just done the TRI, and he was auditing my stuff. Everything passed, everything was good, everything was nice to handle, it was all handwritten out, didn't have Excel spreadsheets yet. They looked at the other people. We've been reporting every year for lead. And 1 year, it was missed. The consultant did it. What I found is they had the binder, and like every time you had a binder, you would go through and you would cull the list, and there was you had one section, and then the next section, the ELPO was missing. They didn't think to even ask about the fact that an 800,000 gallon tank of paint was missing. And if you report, again, this is why I tell you, look at what you've reported over the last couple of years. If you've reported it every year, and all of a sudden you find out, oh, I don't have to report. It's like, wouldn't your brain go, well, I'm not reporting this year, what do we do? With formulation, whatever. But they didn't, they missed it. So 90,000 later, from penalties, we took care of it. So again, it's just making sure, look at, if they start, they will look for the prior year. They will just look for the issues, and it is 90% of the time it's going to be on applicability determinations and the threshold counts. And if they find that there, then they will just continue to go back just to see if it's a consistent error, it was just for that year.
All right. And along the same lines, just making sure that we're keeping a record of applicability. And this goes too for Form A versus Form R, just making sure that you've got that as a part of your documentation too. QA/QC, that's something that we really stress and something that we at Sage take to heart and try to recommend to our clients is just making sure that you give it a good QA/QC of the numbers, that each step of the process is documented, that you have your required record keeping on site, and we'll go into expected record keeping and how to survive a TRI audit. All right, so why spend the time and effort? Violators could be subject to up to $37,500 each day for each chemical. So that can get pretty steep pretty fast when you're going back 5 years. Another reason would be public data, public accountability, making sure that you're not being overly conservative or underreporting. And agencies use it for other purposes, like if you have to submit your CERCLA release reporting. They have information on those fugitive releases, maybe from your spills. Does that match with what you've reported? You know, so making sure that the documents that you've submitted to the agency throughout the year, you at least did a double check and make sure that that kind of matches up, whether that's your emission inventory or your stormwater, you know, making sure you pass the sanity check. Because when they do an audit, that's most likely what they'll use as kind of the starting point if they look at your releases. So making sure that we've double checked our emissions, our releases, water and waste transfers, and double checking your numbers twice, whether that's in your calculations or what you've incorporated on your forms. Managing your spreadsheets, making sure that you're incorporating corrections and changes. One of the things that I like to do for my clients is, as I'm doing the tier 2, if I notice a change in a TRI chemical, I'll jot that down to make sure that we get that incorporated for the following year, since I'm already looking at the SDS. You know, changes in process, addition of catalysts, making sure you're talking to each relevant department. And making sure that, you know, you've kind of worked through anything that you might have questions on and documented your methods, your guidance used, and your assumptions and data sources. Okay, so the expected, in quotations, record keeping. The expected level of effort in emissions calculations is high. And for your audit file, you'll want to keep on site all of your required information that you use to create those calculations. And kind of as we talked about earlier, EPA is expecting you to use your best available data and your best available methods. So you don't have to go out and create, you know, additional sampling or testing, just making sure you're aware of what you have available and using it as applicable. So documentation of each step of the process. So that's going to start with applicability. So will this apply to our facility, as we started out, you know, this TRI section with, and documenting thresholds for each chemical, which threshold's going to apply. Do we, you know, add them all together? Do we exceed? And then also for the final step, which would be aggregating your releases to be reported on your Form R. Off-site transfers. What was there? How much? Where did it go? You know, was it recycled? Was it sent off on a hazardous waste manifest? Was it recycled as product? Other required calculations would be your treatment for that Section 7, recycling, energy recovery, and transfers between your media. And completion of the process. So this, back in the day, this was more relevant, and this would be more relevant for your tier 2s, like getting proof of submission. But now it's all submitted online, so you'll get that email saying it was submitted. And then a couple months later, you'll get an email from EPA saying, if you want to review your data, go ahead. Otherwise, this is what we're going to publish to EnviroFacts and the various databases for public. And future changes and non-changes. So required record keeping. So this is directly from 40 CFR. Each person subject to the notification requirements of this subpart must retain the following records for a period of 3 years. So that'll be all supporting materials and documentation used to determine whether reporting is required, and all supporting materials and documentation used in developing each required notice. And records retained under this section must be maintained at the facility, and records must be readily available to EPA. And so this is the cover of EPA's audit handbook for conducting Section 313 and CERCLA audits. All right, so typical TRI audit. Miss, do you want to cover audits? Or I can if you want.
No,
Didn't know if you
go
wanted
ahead.
to.
Let's start that one and then we'll talk about the disclosure stuff. One of the things is to know that the protocol's really good for, and this is CERCLA and EPCRA.
it's really good for like tier 2 purposes. When you get to 313, it's like validate that they have the correct NAICS code. This is an old version. It hasn't been updated. Verify that you have, the number of employees. And then it's, do you manufacture, process, or otherwise use any of the TRI chemicals? And that's the other part of that. And I'm just like, well, what the hell? And I laugh because even in some of our, Lauren has seen in some of our proposals, we'll audit against it, but it's just like, it kills me because I'm like, what? But because EPA's created this, it is just like the regulation itself is pretty short and simplified. Tier 2 is different, 302, 304 is different, but to audit 313, it's a whole different thing. And because it's case by case, because there's so many different facilities, because there's so many different chemicals, you can't, I think she and I could prepare a better audit checklist of what we look at, and even talk with EPA. I found a very old document, but what they do is for their EPCRA 313 auditors, they hire people who used to be in industry, and they contract them to do the audit. So, when I'm ready to retire, I could go talk to EPA and then come on board as a TRI auditor and get a Kevlar vest, But it's one of those. Lauren, I've actually talked to the Region 7 auditor, real nice guy, but he came from the electroplating industry. And it's a good, he's gone to boat manufacturers, he's done stuff, but he's gone to electroplating places, and they'll say, oh yeah, we got this and this, and then they'll start asking them technical questions, and they're like, oh, crap. He knows what he's talking about. But they learn a lot of stuff, so a lot of times you get, process engineers, people who can come in there because they recognize what to look at. So it is one of those that is what they do, and it's not just a pencil pusher, EPA doesn't do this. They hire people out of industry or talk with them that are retired, and they actually have a training way of how they go about doing and what they're looking for. So it gets pretty interesting. You get in, and they like doing it because they like working plants. So.
Yeah, so in talking to, as Miss just said, sitting down with some EPA inspectors, typically what they'd start the day off with would be a site tour, walking the processes, getting a feel of, the process, maybe speak with some process engineers, and then records that they'd review could be your emergency response plans, emergency release notification reports, again, making sure that that's matching up with either releases reported in Section 8 or fugitives, chemical inventory forms, SDSs, maybe a pollution prevention plan, your Tier 2 reports, any toxic chemical source reduction and recycling reports, and then of course your TRI Form Rs and Form As and the related documentation, and then maybe your hazardous waste contingency plan, or so pretty much everything. Typical physical features inspected include your chemical storage areas, chemical manufacturing or processing areas, record keeping systems, your maintenance shop, hazardous waste areas, treatment units, recycling sites, disposal sites, and service impoundments. So when I do a compliance audit, I usually like to ask them to walk me through the process. So starting at receiving and ending at finished product, let's walk it that way. So I'd recommend that, especially if you're starting at a new site, maybe walking it that way, getting people to show you around. I find that to be pretty helpful. So during the audit, it'll start with introductions, get the inspector's information, can kind of go over safety, brief description of the operations and plant layout, and let the inspector lead the audit discussion. You don't want to give away any more than what you're asked. And typically, the best advice that I've heard is to have one designated experienced person responding to inspector questions. Don't have everybody all jumping in at once, Have the program owner take care of that. Or call your consultant if it's scheduled. We have consultants go on site, during the audits or that kind of thing. So during the audit, get all follow-up inspector requests and questions in writing. Give the inspector a list of any requested records that still needs to be given out, and end the meeting when it's over. So when he seems to be done with his questions, you don't want to chime in with, are you sure you don't want to see? Or, oh, we didn't get to show you, you know, just let it be over.
Right. That's one of the things, just like, oh, you know, and again, Laura makes a good point, and a lot of times when Bruce is talking, he's been in an actual meeting where the guy goes, you know, you need to make sure and talk to these people who are going to be in the meeting with you, that shut up until I ask you a question and only answer the question. Because he was actually in a meeting where, so we're done, and the guy goes, oh, what about this over here? And they ended up staying for another couple of hours. And it's just like, oh my, you know, it's like you want to kill them and you can't show blood, you know, in front of the inspector.
Yeah,
Inspector,
you wait till
so.
they're gone and then.
Yeah, right. And then this next one, follow up promptly. This goes for even if you just get a question or inquiry, maybe via email. You know, why didn't you incorporate dioxin? Why didn't you incorporate H2S? And if the answer is, you know, we have a different NAICS code, we're no longer a refinery, you want to make sure you get that in, you know, and that you show them that you have an answer as quickly as you can. Keep all correspondence and be patient. It may take a while in order to get that final audit report back, if you even ever get a final audit report back. It can take a long time. So approaches to compliance: correct non-compliance as soon as possible, retain a consultant and or attorney, and submit overdue reports without raising red flags. So this is leading in to our audit disclosure, which we'll get to shortly. If you discover your facility is or may have been in violation of Section 313, then this is what we were talking about earlier with there is a disclosure policy to EPA. And there are certain criteria that you would need to meet in order to qualify. And so that's when you would want to retain maybe a consultant, and they can advise on how to get in touch with third-party counsel and go over all of that. Okay, so next, just a little bit to touch on what all the public can see and how they can use your data, and how you can even get data for other facilities to maybe help you out when creating your report. It's pretty easy to get data, and keep in mind that the public understanding of data may be limited. So kind of keep that in mind when you're double checking your numbers and your assumptions. Use by the press, we've seen it, you know, included in various newspapers and articles, and use by the agencies, taking a look at your Form Rs and saying, oh, you know, they've got this chemical, I hope they have that in their RMP, you know, and checking it out that way. So 2013 top 10 companies. It's just a list. TRI trends. The point of this is, I think the most interesting part of this is that metal mining is 47% of the total releases. So just kind of interesting. Puts it in perspective.
Well, and the thing is it is very amazing. Like this all came off they just published this, the national trends. They just published it or put it online like about a week and a half ago. And there's so much information. And one of the things that I was just noticing, you know, when we start talking about, you know, look at all these polluters and everything else, we're down there as far as, you know, chemicals is in 12%, you know, metals is in, you know, 8%. You know, if you're looking at food and beverage, I mean, they're in the 3%. Refineries getting in, I think they looked them in on the chemical side of things. It's very fascinating where, who's really leading it. I mean, metal mining is it, you know, it's a lot of the metal, it's in metal oxides, metal mining compounds and stuff, because, and it's not air releases. I mean, you know, that's a whole different segment of how it's done. It's because of the fact that overall their releases to the environment are significant because they've got all the stockpiling and the overburden and everything else. And they're doing millions of tons of processing of those materials, so.
And here's a slide on regional trends.
You know, just one of the things I just find, you know, even this one on the chemical trends, you know, back in, you know, in 2000, I was looking at 2000 and 2013, but, you know, it's all the same compounds.
It's just where they're at. I mean, you look at the bottom on 2013, hydrochloric acid was number 10. And then in 2000, it was number 3. You know, copper compounds have increased. Well, that's because copper mining is being done at Red Dog, you know, at the Red Dog, you know, mining area. And so there's a lot of similar, it's all the same chemicals, and they, you know, some of them are just higher than the other. It's just interesting how they have shifted.
What is primary metals?
Primary metals is lead, mining, smelting, iron, zinc, copper.
Like, but it's different.
I think she
from-
means for the
it's
industry.
different metal mining. It's the smelting
I
portion.
think it's the smelting. I think the primary metals. I think that's metal. I believe that is the metal. That's the metal smelting and mining, and there's zinc smelting. And that's how I've always been told is what it is, as opposed to metal mining like your manganese and nickel and copper and all that stuff.
I was just curious. I mean, I grew up in an area that did a lot of bauxite mining.
Sure.
And I assume that the mining portion of that and the actual production should be different.
Yeah. Aw.
I did this when I first started with my company for corporate and went through, because they wanted to preempt, I guess, to figure out what was going to be available and crunch all of the numbers now so that we would have,
Mhm.
you know, responses and explanations before the parent company reports.
Mhm.
And so that was, and it was, yeah, it was really useful and I did
Primary metals
Yeah.
industries include facilities that
all
produce
of these
metals,
other things with the
ores,
same code as us are reporting these things. Are we also reporting these things?
Yeah. And especially from more of a corporate perspective, that could be useful. And you can get pretty much all the information.
And a great use of insurance.
Yes. That's what we use our interns for over the summer.
Yeah.
We're
Well, I
like,
mean,
trend this.
You learn
What's
a
going
lot.
on over
You
here?
learn a lot about CRI just doing that. I mean, I did.
Yeah, I agree. And industry trends for air releases. As you can see, they're going down. And air releases by industry. And so here's a link to where we got those graphs from, if you want to see the whole report, and other public access tools that we use in our daily life would be tri.net. EnviroFacts is my personal favorite because that includes all your other medias, not just TRI. And My Right to Know application, there's a mobile app now, and TRI data files. So
Check wherever you
It
are.
works a little
Yeah,
weird.
right?
I played with it, but then I couldn't get it to work all the way. Bruce said there was something messed up. They said that it's like I just can't.
I've seen some good environmental apps, not this one per se, but I've seen some good ones. All right, so TRI.net, what can you do? This can kind of give you like the Google Earth, search radius, kind of see what's going on, obtain trending information, see the EPA reports for your facilities, and apply other data layers related to environmental justice, chemical toxicity, and all those types of things, geography, and it interfaces with Google Maps, Google Earth. EnviroFacts TRI tools. So this EnviroFacts database searches through all of these various things and kind of compiles it all into the EnviroFacts database. And it would give you a listing of each chemical that got released, each chemical that got reported, the various releases by media, and then a comparison that goes all the way back a really long number of years, like at least 10 years. So you can kind of get a feel for the facility's reporting history. The My Right to Know app, I haven't used it. Miss? Anything?
I I have tried messing with it. I mean, it's.
Isn't it new
sounds-
this year?
It's new this
Yeah.
year, yeah. And it's like they
So-
kind of were introducing it, and then it's like I took it off, and then they loaded it up again just to see and try. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with playing around with it, and I don't know anybody who has used it. So, you know,
I'll have to try
it
it.
might be scary.
Early
I'll have to try it now.
Yeah, right?
it's like
It
try
could be our
you
own
know.
special thing. EPA TRI data files, you can download these for any TRI reporting year since 1987. And this is really only recommended with users who have extensive knowledge of TRI data. There's 7 file types for the TRI Basic Plus data files, including facility, chemical, releases, and other waste management, summary information, and a summary of your source reduction activities. And it's just super detailed. It's definitely the most detailed of all of them. All right, enforcement. So we just thought it'd be fun to include some fun,
Not to
fun, terrifying, whatever. We're sick. Yeah. So just some recent enforcement items. So $49,000 for RMP and TRI. And we've been seeing RMP and TRI linked together more recently. Singular wireless, $750K. Enhanced technologies, $59K. 5N Plus Inc. proposed fine of $93,000, and that was for Tier 2. And Glitech, $25K for failing to call LEPC, CERC, and NRC within 15 minutes of sulfuric acid spill.
There's one I just found, and I was like, holy crap. I mean, that's pretty big. I mean, that's within 15 minutes. I think there were 2 hours that they called it. But, you know, again, it depends on the severity and what, you know, how bad the spill was. Could be a whole some degree to superhero one. But one of the things when you take note, if you're familiar with some of these, you'll understand. There's components, obviously. You can have civil and criminal penalties. When you have a civil penalty, you can pay a civil penalty, pay the check, whatever. But then a lot of times you can minimize the actual civil penalty by doing a supplemental environmental project. And so what you are trying to do is if you're going to pay for something, you're going to pay for like, you have to pay. SEPs can only be done where they are somewhat applicable to what you screwed up with. So when you look at for singular $750,000 penalty, it was in 43 states. So this was a lot of little facilities that had computers, and they had fuel oil, and they had lead acid batteries for backup for the computer systems. But they paid $625,000 in SEPs. So what you're looking at is you're well over $1 million. They just, this is playing the game of, okay, you can pay a bunch of penalties, and they can go to whomever, and they can go to EPA, and it looks really good to the bean counters. But then you're at least also paying. They had to do some independent auditing. They contributed to beefing up some security aspects for some of the LEPCs and the SERCs. So again, if it's contributing to helping with making it better so that it will help out, the agencies into detecting more non-compliance, and that's where they can put the SEPs to. So when you look at a SEP and civil penalties, enhanced technology, $59,000, that's no big deal. But look at the $180,000 SEP.
Yeah.
They had to do independent audits of all of their facilities. And that was just for one site. So, they had violations of Clean Air Act because they didn't have permits, and then they also had Tier 2 violations for failing to submit reports.
Now, is that for not submitting the reports or not, or missing chemicals on the reports?
Could be either one. In some cases, a lot of these were failing to submit Tier 2.
I think she just went back.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so some more
That goes back.
files.
Clean Harbors, they didn't report, they had some missing chemicals, and they also did not have accurate emissions calculations that were provided for the chemicals that we were reporting. One of the things that you have to really take a look at is, and this is what's weird, all the agency, all the regional offices are very different because when you look at like Swiss Valley Farms, those are co-ops, those are small areas. They had 7, and they failed to report nitric acid and nitrates that were coincidentally manufactured by putting the nitric acid. Again, this is where they catch it into their wastewater. The issue here that you start really taking a look at is there's becoming more and more tier 2 violations. But what we also want to take a look at is, that lovely 37.5. It used to be $27,500. Well, then they've gone through 3 iterations of inflation, so now it's 37.5. They are never going to hit you with that on a daily basis per violation. What Region 6 is doing right now is, if they do an audit, they will hit you 37.5 per chemical per year of violation. But there is a matrix I think I told you guys this earlier, there's a policy matrix that they will calculate based on how much over the threshold are you and how bad is it, how much over the threshold are you, and then how late are you when you submit the form, whether it's a tier 2 or even on a TRI. And so it depends on the type of chemical and what they've got. And so you can have a range of how much they can hit you upside the head. What they're doing with a lot of facilities is they nail one facility and then they hold you hostage, that you then have to do auditing of all your other facilities. Or sometimes they just call up their other regions and say, go out and hit this. They send them a letter and they said, we'll be out 30 days. And so they pretty much will just lambast you so that they can hit all facilities. Because if they see inconsistencies or problems at one site or 2 sites, then they're going to think that it's just basically happening company-wide, and then they'll go for more.
And here's a link to the TRI guidance documents. And there's a couple different hotlines that you can call if you run into help or want not EPA, but this taxpayer-funded TRI technical support. I forget who runs it. But anyway, you can get their feedback on your question. And you call and you ask your question and they put you on hold, and then they'll search for specific industry-related guidance documents and email them to you. So they're actually I find them to be pretty helpful. And that's the TRI Information Center. And then there's also a number you can call for CDX if you have any questions as you're going through the Try Me Web program. So my certifying official can't see the link, what do I do? That kind of thing. And I've actually called them, I know Miss had mentioned that EPA is even double checking like your Dun and Bradstreet number. And when I called, they had a list of previously reported Dun and Bradstreet numbers, so you could kind of see what was listed for your parent company and that kind of thing. Here's a screenshot of the EPA website that shows you a list of all of your guidance documents. So there's a guidance document for what is a glycol ether in the glycol ether category, how do I calculate nitrates from the passivation of nitric acid, how do I yada yada yada. There's a whole bunch of them.
They have them they have them specifically for, like, there is a lead and lead compounds guidance document. They have chemical specific guidance documents. They also have sector specific guidance documents. There's one for bulk fuel terminals. But it has a lot of good data in it.
Yeah, so the other place that I'd recommend that I feel like it can be underutilized is the TRI instructions. So each year EPA publishes the instructions booklet for that year, and that actually has some example calculations and helpful hints in it too. And so here's the EPCRA hotline, section 313 mailing address, and Try Me Web links.
I like that it's a
Oh.
Bruce Dumb guy down there, so they did.
Oh. I'm not Bruce. So,
You're not Bruce.
or you can call Missy or Lauren. And I'll give you guys my card, but my email is lauren.kovach.
Okay.
Oh. Did you want to touch on audit disclosure?
Yeah, I'd like to, even, we're gonna.
Thought there was gonna be a slide on it.
Coming in on Thursday, but I know that you had asked about that run. Basically, the long
filed voluntary disclosures in almost every EPA region. I think Region 3 might be the only one that I haven't done. But here's how it works. If you go through and we do an assessment. Let's say that you call, it's like, you know what, I haven't been to this facility. Let's take, for instance, your St. Louis facility. It's like, Miss, I need you, Lauren, go down there. Here's a record, do an assessment, see what we've got down there. And, you know, what I typically like to do is, I have done voluntary disclosures without outside counsel. I have done them with outside counsel. Whenever we do audits, typically it's nice if you really think that there could be a problem, if there's a big facility, or if you really think that there could be a major issue. I would always advise to go with outside counsel. I mean, I have a lawyer in St. Louis that we've done a bunch of work for a bunch of facilities, a bunch of clients, and he pretty much we've got it down to a T. It's just like, I call him and I said, got a guy that we need to do an audit, it really needs to go through you, they don't have outside counsel. He'll call them up, he'll get a retainer letter from them. He sends me a letter and says, okay, I need you to provide me a proposal. I send him a proposal for very little of his time, which everybody freaks out with the lawyers, but for very little of his time, he gets a retainer letter set up. I send him the proposal that I could have either changed to his name or to the owner's name, and we get hired. We'll go do the audit. The beauty of going through outside counsel is if we find something, it takes time. I mean, you got to go through, you know, you can go visit the site, you can go look at process flows, you can get an idea what they're doing. Then you got to go through MSDSs. Let's say that they got really crappy record keeping, you know, or they don't have spreadsheets. I mean, I've actually said, okay, give me your background documentation. Then I get a copy of the Form R. And I get a napkin, you know, with some scribbles on it. Okay, do I need to do an audit? No, my finding is your documentation sucks. Who knows what mess you have? But what we'll do is we'll go in there and we will sometimes have to recreate. There's many times where we have to get in there, and because we really don't know, as part of the audit, we actually set up the threshold calculation. And why, I'll tell you, is this. The law, and are you both going to be here on Thursday? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because we'll get into this pretty heavy.
Are you attending our class on Thursday?
Yeah.
Oh, good deal.
Yeah.
Well,
So
then
see-
we don't even have.
Yeah. But
Spoiler
what happens? Yeah, but what happens here, and this is always good. And again, it is one of those that we'll get in much more deep into it. But redundancy is what really makes TRI. I mean, you just got to keep banging it into your brain. But a lot of times what we've gone in is we know we're going to have a mess. We know that there's no paperwork. And what we actually do is we set up a damn spreadsheet and start doing the calculations. Because guess what? The requirements, there is, we've argued about this, not her and I. She and I are in agreement, you know, haha. But we've argued about this before, is there really is a provision in the TRI regulation that if you're not subject to it, you have to have the documentation proving that you're not subject. Now, some people say you only have to have the documentation if you're subject to it. And I'm like, then how the hell do you know if you're not subject to it if you haven't done the background calcs and done the threshold determination? So we go round and round, but here's my whole thing. If you don't have it, we need to create it. And then you pray really hard that you haven't hit a threshold. Because then basically what we've got is, and this is a little gray, but I know enough lawyers, I've run it by them. You can do a voluntary disclosure, but if you just don't have the spreadsheets to show that you've done the evaluation and you haven't truly triggered anything, just get the paperwork in place and move on, okay? Because it's almost like, whew, all right, let's get it in, let's get it set up. You're gonna still have to do it anyway if you triggered. We were still gonna have to set up the spreadsheet, we're still gonna have to look at all your MSDSs, so the work's gonna have to be done no matter what, okay? However, if we find out that you have triggered something, until I tell outside counsel I've ground truthed everything, I need to sometimes ask questions to say, okay, is this truly what you're doing? Because I want to make sure that we understand the processes. If we determine that you have triggered a Form R report and you never have done before, we want to go through the voluntary audit policy and use the privilege. So notifying your outside counsel means you still are in the dark. It gives us time to talk about it, get ready, because the moment that he notifies you, the time clock, the 21-day time clock starts. I messed with the 21-day time clock. I may know darn good and well that you have triggered reporting just based on walking in there and getting a feel for it. But until I prove it, which is doing the calculations, that time clock hasn't started yet. Okay? There are many times we've walked in and we found out that we have an issue, and we can actually use the 21 days to complete our whole Form R evaluation and get the things filed at the same time that we file the disclosure. Okay? So the day when you know, when I tell legal, or I tell you or your in-house counsel, let's say that you choose not to do it, it's like, okay, that's fine. Then I'll basically tell you, as soon as we have confirmation and everything's been QA/QC'd, we'll submit to you that we need to do a voluntary disclosure. That starts the time clock. We now have 21 days to notify EPA that you have done the violation. It used to be that you would just send one letter and say, okay, we've done it, and you'd wait till EPA got back to you. Now what you do is you send a letter and then you answer all the questions that fulfill the nexus for the 9 pieces that go with the voluntary disclosure, under the voluntary audit policy. That, it was a voluntary thing, we were not forced to do this. Here's how it happened, here's what we did, we hired, Melissa and Lauren over at Sage, and they found this, and we found this, and here's the chemicals that we have to report. Yes, it's only at this facility. Here's how many employees are done, you're covered in a CS code, and, no, we'll never do it again. Here's what we're gonna implement as a corrective action, that we're gonna go back 3 years, we're gonna get this taken care of, we're gonna put in that we will be audited every 5 years. It is one of the things that I would caution is, you have to commit to how to make sure this doesn't happen again. One is, maybe you're going to put in a standard operating procedure, or you're going to undergo ISO certification. I would say no, don't do that. But you put into a preparation, or maybe we'll do audits every 4 years, or if there is a change in EHS personnel. Things like that. They just want to make sure that you caught it and you don't get in the same mess again. And you fulfill all the requirements of the 9 items, the 9 conditions, and you send that in. Typically what they'll do is they'll evaluate it. At the time that you make the 21-day time clock starts, you now have 60 days to get all of the Form R evaluation, even for previous years, completed. Typically when we do an assessment, we think that we found problems, we make sure that we will go in, if we're strictly looking at EPCRA, we'll look at your last 2 years. If we start seeing trends, then we'll start asking you for the next, 4 years, so that, or 3 years, so that we have that 5 years of data. And we can typically set up the spreadsheets to do all 5 years at the same time. Because once you establish, if you don't have much to go on, and we have to do this anyway, we can set it up, and we just, because it's all going to be your usages, so if you go back and give us all the information, we just set it up and we do the calculations for all years. We will take a look at assumptions, we'll take a look at your processes, we'll document it with footnotes, we'll establish and use all the exemptions, and it's really comprehensive. We have a tab that literally is called the Assumptions tab, and I've told Lauren, anytime I'm educating anybody on TRI, it is the most important tab in the whole calculation spreadsheet, because it basically says, here's our process, here's the operations we have and the type of products we're using. Here's what the potential TRI chemicals are going to be. Here's what the category it's going to be: processed, manufactured, otherwise used, and it lists every one that applies. And then you talk about the process. It's like, what's going on at your site? What is different? Here's what the facility does. It's basically a discussion of what is happening at your facility. I had actually had a process engineer review our assumptions tab, and he goes, we do this is the day before July 1. So what is it? Is that the 30th of June? Yeah, it's June 30th. I talked to the environmental manager. Well, no, we don't do this. Everything's fine. I said, look it over. And I said, run this by your process engineer. June 30th, almost toward the end of the day, process engineer says, we make nitrates, we measure for them, we actually do some sampling for that stuff. He says, we're making nitrates. Environmental manager didn't even know that. So we had to do brand new threshold calculations and get all the data on July 1st, and then we submitted it so that the whole report went in. And again, those are the panic attacks you start having, but you got it taken care of. And again, you know, that's the thing where you involve the process engineers. You have different people, different sets of eyes looking on it. So you file the voluntary disclosure, you fulfill it within the 21 days, you just continue to start working on it. Typically, EPA will send you a notice of determination, and that basically says you have fulfilled all 9 requirements. The first condition is the most important. Was this done voluntarily or as part of an audit? If you fulfill all 9 and they believe that you have, Region 6 is really good about that, you have 100% mitigation of your civil penalties, of the gravity penalties. The gravity penalties. Now, could they come back at you for economic benefit? They can. What you always put in there is how much you paid, you know, for us as a consultant to put it together, depending on how much. I mean, if you've got 12 chemicals, you know, we've done full evaluations where we had a catalyst facility that we did some work for, and they had not done them. Well, by the time that we went through all of their records, all of their SDSs, putting together the reports, doing the disclosure, getting everything filed, we were at about 28,000. Well, plant manager was bitching a little bit about that, and then they found a couple other things, so I think we had to add some more money to it. So let's say it was $32,000 that they spent to have us do it. Well, the day that he was bitching about the fact of having to pay for a little bit more money to get this done, he got the letter from EPA. EPA Region 6 actually asked how much your company is worth, not the facility that messed up, your company. And why? Because I do calculation of civil penalties for this stuff. It's called size of the violator. And it is includes the parent company. It is the corporation, not just the person, you know, the facility that screwed up. And they plug it in, and there is a number. I mean, it is a range that is calculated. And what they found out is if EPA had come in and found them, and since they were doing a lot of auditing, it could easily have happened, they were going to be fined upwards of $380,000. There was no bitching about paying for 32K, but again, you don't get the beauty of that, but that's where Region 6 was $37.5 per chemical per violation. Well, $37.5 for 5 years is what, $185,000? I mean, they had a couple chemicals they missed, and it was just like, oh my. So again, that's why it's very important that it's that, as you said, it's that labor part that's up front, but then you have the spreadsheets to write. We can train you on the spreadsheets and fill them in, and then do them yourself the next year, and then send them to us to QA/QC. We have a couple of foundries, a couple of plants that they do them, and then they pay us to do the QA/QC. So it works out good because we can find out, wait a minute, something's wrong here, or if they don't understand something, or if there's something that's changed. And so we just do an independent QA/QC for them. One, they're now not spending all the money. We're helping them learn, and that was the whole purpose of doing so. We actually have trained some of the engineers to become the environmental health and safety person. So there's a lot of ways that we can go into the system, but it's now, in some cases, we've had one where, you know what, your records are so bad, it really is going to be cheaper to just toss it and start over. You know, but if you file voluntary disclosures for chemicals that you've never reported, you do voluntary revisions to already existing reports when you find little errors, or you didn't report the right race code, or, oh crap, I'm missing a decimal point and I need to do something. It's okay. Go in there as soon as you notice it and document it. And there's revision codes in there that you had better data, you had something else, or it's a whoops. But anytime you have a missing chemical or you have not filed for something, file a voluntary disclosure. Because there is not a guarantee that by just, some people said, well, why don't we just go ahead and correct it and figure it out and file it? I said, because if you file it, they could come at you and do an audit. And they could still fine you retroactively for it. By using counsel or by doing the voluntary disclosure, you're covering yourself
and you at least have a set of eyes to look at it all before, to make sure that there's nothing else that you may have missed. So, that's how that works.
And before we conclude, if you guys don't mind, the very first page of your binders is a course evaluation form. And if you don't mind, we'd love to have feedback. Under pressure.